So, this is the matter. This story about a guy who traveled around the world to prove how cool he is. He decided to follow the harsh path. He decided to act hard every day, which sometimes leads to funny situations. It all starts with an unexpected thunderstorm that twisted a naive guy. The fact that he was in the sky was very surprised by him. The trees and bushes from such a height seemed tiny. It was far from the ground. Which, worst of all, the young man flew down, and this forced him to panic. The landing turned out to be soft, right into the thick grass. He lay with his arms and legs spread in different directions. Waking up, he began to get up with moans. Turning over on his back, the young man thought. Everything that was happening was very strange. He had to die in a car accident. On the way from heaven, Jueqiu somehow found himself in almost without clothes. He lay with a naked torso and black trousers. This place was very strange, and the young man himself could not even move. Suddenly, high thick grass moved apart. A girl came out of her. The stranger in a short skirt held a light blouse, which kept on it only with the help of one button. Looking at the beauty with a light blush, he decided that it was a mountain fairy. No one else could appear here. Suddenly he understood everything. The girl was clearly embarrassed and furtively glanced around, holding her clothes. Stopping right near the young man, Shui turned her back to him and hastily began to pull off her underwear. Moreover, she was going to make her physiological needs right over the young man, as if she had not noticed him. Oh, this is a violent fantasy of the author. Write in the comments. One of you fell into such situations. The view of the naked peaches of the girl made Jueqiu turn red. In addition, he thought about what happened next. Without a cloth of the development of events, he asked the girl to step aside. An unfamiliar voice nearby simply shocked Shui. She blushed even more. Not believing her ears, the girl slowly turned. Seeing a half-naked guy under her, she closed and lowered her eyes. Having taken possession of herself, Shui at the same moment broke off and soared into the air with lightning speed, leaving a golden trace behind him. This was not golden rain. After all the warn, the young man was about to jump out of his chest. He was afraid that someday would happen. Something strange happened. At the same time, scraps of dozens and hundreds of various memories arose in his head, from nowhere. The guy frowned. If you believe those memories, at some period of time he was in a completely different body. Then the body belonged to a high young man. Its origin was not at all aristocratic. The guy was a poor orphan, but with legendary roots. That is why one day the emperor chose him as a prince. The emperor provided him with unlimited access. All his free time, the prince sat and meditated, honing his skills. He trained very hard. This led to the fact that after 6 years the young man began to form a gold nucleus. On the same day he married. A week flew like one wedding night. Unfortunately, his wife stole absolutely all his talents and spiritual development. Upon learning that the prince is now nothing valued, the royal guard threw a bag over his head and escorted from the palace. By order of the emperor, the young man was executed at the border and left his body in a dense place where even the birds never flew. Now everything has become clear. After Zhu Qiu died in a car accident, he found himself in a completely different body and other world. The young man got up and threatened the heavens with his fist. They did not cost anything to return the events to an earlier period of time, to the very beginning of the wedding night. Suddenly, a formidable, accusing voice came. The guy is stupefied. Most likely that girl returned to sort things out. Shu Ryu, in the same clothes, not bothering to pull the linen, quickly went down to him, saying that no one dared to peep behind her. Without waiting for the inevitable reprisal, Jueqiu rushed to run away, making excuses on the go, but Shui did not want to listen to him. The young man rushed like a wind. Only a miracle could save him. He shouted that the girl herself came to him and was nearby. He asked the mountain fairy to begin to put on linen and only then kill him. Shui shook with anger. She went down faster, reducing the distance with every second. The girl said she would kill him now. The situation seemed completely hopeless. Shui could not fire from her forever. Shui was much faster. Imaginary memories came to the aid of the young man. Shui occurred that a real prince was once in this body. The young man extracted the golden royal sign and raised it high, showing the girl. He ordered Shui to stop immediately. Having impersoned the prince of the Ho Yuan Empire, the young man swore that for disobedience he would destroy the whole family of the girl. Jie was very familiar with this gold token, holding the whole country in fear. She immediately stopped. Shu was delighted. He saw what impression a sign made on a girl. Now he could not be afraid for his life. There was a strange sound. A melodic voice reported the activation of a deception system to enslave the whole world. For the first undisclosed deception, The young man accrued 1 point of deception. In the future, he will get the opportunity to spend them. At the moment, the weakened Shui Q was on the continent of Dunquan, in the status of prince of the country Huan. The young man looked around. There was absolutely no one near that ferry. That voice sounded out of nowhere. All this sounded strange. For a lie to other people, some system will also pay him. Life began to improve. This theory required confirmation. Zhu Q smiled and called the girl to him. An interesting thought occurred to him. Getting up to the full height, Zhu Q sternly told the girl that she was behaving incorrectly. He has Shuru honor because he looks at her. Landing to the ground, the girl bent down. With a gust of wind, her tiny skirt lifted up, exposing her legs in linen. The artist in any convenient situation tries to draw Svetlfi panties. At that very moment, Shui Ru grabbed the sword with lightning speed, and the sparkling tip of the deadly weapon was at the prince's face. The girl already managed to straighten and accused Zhu Q of a lie. She said that now she would definitely kill the young man. Shuzu smiled barely noticeably. On the face of a stranger, he realized that the girl began to doubt. It was necessary to put pressure more. The young man quietly stepped a little closer and asked how she dares to doubt the words of the crowned person. Zhu Q beckoned her with a finger to him and offered to take a couple more steps, if there was enough courage. Zhu Ryu hesitantly trampled on the spot. In the ear of the young man, a melodic voice was immediately heard. The system notified him of obtaining a fraud point. The girl believed him. Shui Q could not restrain himself. From the successful operation of deception, he involuntarily smiled. Shui Ryu looked at him suspiciously. This situation has fun more and more. The young man published a nervous laugh, trying to hide his sincere emotions. Unable to stand it, the young man burst into a laughter. The surprised girl frowned. She did not see anything funny about it. Zhu Q could not stop. He laughed as much, as if he had entertained the best court jesters. The young man could not believe that he just received another point of deception. The system seemed to be created for him. Su Q recalled that he was promised a reward, and ran his fingers in the air, trying to call the system menu. A screen arose in the air. An image of a gift in yellow colorful paper appeared on the screen. The package itself was pulled by a red ribbon and tied to a bow. The system has listed awards for completing the assignment, and reported the found spiritual roots. Zhu Q did not understand what was at stake. Suddenly, something happened. The young man gained all the power that the prince possessed earlier. In addition, the system restored the spiritual roots of the young man himself. Zhu Q felt a surge of energy emanating directly from his body. As soon as he stomped his foot, all the grass around was drooping. The young man published a nervous laugh. He began to laugh again, and the girl did not like it. She did not know what to expect from a young man. Raising his hands up, Zhu Q shouted, thundering that he would restore justice. He behaved like crazy and cursed the imperial family. Shui Ryu sent a sword in his direction and angrily asked how he could speak poorly about the emperor if he himself is a prince. Zhu Q immediately stopped laughing. He was too carried away by his role. It was time to apply gifts received from the system. Having caused the system menu, the young man activated the tablets for quick self-development and received the technique of 5 elements. Zhu Q felt like a grain of sand in the universe. The knowledge of many civilizations filled his consciousness. In addition, he received 10,000 points of experience. Using the system, the internal energy of Qi accumulated to the 2nd level and continued to accumulate further. By the time when it ended, Zhu Q had the energy of Qi, which was enough to switch to the 10th level. The young man tried to soften the situation. The girl continued to stand with a sword directed at him. Shui Zui admitted that he had nothing to add. The young man smiled barely noticeably and said that he was an unsurpassed master. Shu Ryu was angry. She was already finally tired of it. An angry girl jumped forward, striving to pierce Shui Zui with a sword. The young man began to back, not understanding what happened. The deadly tip of the sword whistled very close. The young man got angry. Defending against the sword was not included in his plans. Bending to evade another blow, Zui Q shouted that the girl acted dishonestly, attacking him. Shu Ryu, with a skewed face from anger, did not pay attention to his words. With a formidable cry, she rushed at him with a sword. Seeing that in a good way it doesn't work out, the young man asked the girl not to regret what would happen. He created a magic water element. At that moment, when Jueru wanted to hit the young man with a sword, the young man threw away the energy not to meet and knocked out the sword from her hands. The girl automatically turned her head to the side and followed the flight of her combat sword. She could not believe her eyes. This liar and jerk was able to block her blow so easily and drop the sword to the side. Calling the element of the earth, Shui Q rushed at the girl. She tried to step back, but the young man did not even think to stop. Having lost her balance, Zhui Ru fell on her back and scaredly put her arms forward, protecting her body from blows. With one movement of his hand, the young man turned her back on his back. After a second, the girl felt that she was tied hand and foot. Zhui was helplessly in green thick grass. She indignantly asked the prince what he was going to do with her. Zhu grinned voluptuously. Squatting near his captive, the young man reminded her that she called him a pervert. His eyes lustfully lit up. Shui Q exclaimed that he could not just let her go. The girl blushed. Her consciousness painted terrible paintings. Zhu Ryu turned red from a scream. She had already begun to wheeze. Zhu Q leaned to his knees and offered to scream, yet still no one would hear. The bound fairy tried her best to break out. Satisfied with himself, the young man leaned closer to her, exhausting from his desire. Suddenly, behind the back of Zhu Q, a strange sound was heard. Someone's voice was angrily indignant at the actions of the young man. The woman irritably demanded to stop what was happening. Disgrace. The young man began to panic. His heart was beating harder. Xuezhu got to his feet. To his surprise, the whole body was shaking. It became harder to hold balance. In addition, the young man felt a strong dizziness and almost lost consciousness. Strong magic was applied against him. Some 3 ghostly objects were closer. Having seen her master among them, Shui Ryu joyfully exclaimed. 2 men and a woman in bright clothes stopped nearby. A gray-haired woman took a step forward and began to report to the young man. Su Q finally found the ability to move and turned around. The mentor looked contemptuously at him and created an element of fire. She would not have lowered the mockery of her students. Leaning the fire out of her hand, the woman vowed to kill the young man. In front of the eyes of the surprised Shueikui Zigzagi, he quickly approached him, turning into a flaming snake. Calling the saving element of the earth on the run, the young man fled. He exclaimed angrily that it was not necessary to do this. Turning back, Shuikyu realized that the situation was getting worse. The fire element quickly caught up with its target. When the fire element was very close, he bifurcated and began to bite the young man from 2 sides at once. Shu Q ran faster. 2 fiery snakeheads rapidly dived down. They were already above the head of the young man. He realized that he had lost. Stretching his hands, Zhui Q jumped forward. 2 fiery flashes landed nearby. At the place of their fall, fiery cracks parted. In the place where the young man had just stood, there was a huge explosion. For several minutes, everything was in a cloud of dust. Suku himself landed nearby. One of the men could not hide his surprise. The young man had to die. The woman did not express her surprise. She felt an element of the earth in that young man, and explained a lot. The mentor thoughtfully said that this insolent is a spy of the UN Empire. Shui Ryu asked her not to draw hasty conclusions. She said that that young man has a sign of the Ho Yuan Empire, and he claimed that he was a prince of the dynasty. The woman laughed. She said that the real prince is now in the Royal Hall of Self-Improvement. The mentor reproached Shui Ryu that she so easily believes people with a word. The girl was indignant to learn that the young man lied to her. Squinting her eyes, the old woman looked angrily at the Zhu Q. He immediately realized that this look did not promise him anything good. An elderly mentor turned her head to her student and in a strict voice called her to her. The girl immediately approached her. The woman handed over the divine rope of deduction. She shone as brightly as if she was woven from sunlight. The young man did not like the appearance of this rope. He realized that this was a special weapon. Xueryu took the gun with pride. Now she felt confident. The girl's eyes threw lightning. She exclaimed that now the young man has nowhere to go. The young man smiled and proudly stated that the prince of the Huan Empire could not stop a small rope. Twisting the rope of immobilization around her, the girl launched a free end into the enemy and shouted that he was to blame. The divine rope tried to wrap the young man's body. The system said that the deception failed, and there would be no reward. The old woman turned out to be quite bloodthirsty, and advised after immobilization to stab the young man with a sword. Exploring the capture, Shuaiqiu was indignant. He shouted that the mentor was worried only for himself. She is afraid that the student cannot defeat the prince. Loosing a rope of immobilization, Shueru rushed forward. She did not like that the young man insults the mentor. Twisting the divine rope of immobilization by a spiral, the girl tried to wrap her opponent. Zhu deftly jumped up and evaded all the captures. No false maneuvers of the divine rope helped. The old woman looked angrily at the young man. She did not like him more and more. This shame simply mocked their clan. During the next deviation, the guy angrily stated that it was better not to touch him. Once he will become strong and will take revenge on him. Shuiryu got angry. She could not catch a young man. Shuqiu came up with a saving thought. He took out a travel talisman. Before the girl's surprised eyes appeared a huge portal with a very bright white glow. She came closer. As soon as the divine rope was ready to wrap himself around the body of the young man, he disappeared in the air. Shuiryu could not believe it. The ministers began to discuss what had happened. One of them suggested that the young man was applied by a talisman of teleportation. An elderly woman ordered to immediately search the area. That guy in a hurry could drop a valuable artifact. Shuru thoughtfully walked around with the divine rope of immobilization. Thinking, she twisted the rope in her hand. That young man was very strange and dexterous. The girl was very interested in who he really was. Meanwhile, the talisman of travel created a small portal, and Suokyu began to fly down. The landing was quite stiff. The goal was achieved. The young man remained alive. Shuekyu was very pleased. He managed to escape after the disclosure of the fraud. In addition, the system accrued 19 more points of deception. The young man reached out with pleasure and lay down on the floor. Suddenly, he drew attention to large hieroglyphs in the center of the hall. At first, the young man thought what seemed to him. The divine travel talisman did not come up with anything better than moving it straight to the main base of the Tianwu sect. Now, Su Q has behaved extremely carefully. He chopped between the rooms on tiptoe. One room was interested in the young man. There were many different chests in this room. Near the wall on the rack, healing potions were laid out. There were even more chests in the neighboring room. Shui Q suggested that he discovered the secret treasury of the Tianwu clan. The young man could not resist the temptation and opened the nearest chest. It turned out to be a brightly shining golden sword. The face of Zhu Q was flooded with a yellow light. He could not admire. At first glance, it was clear that he was a rare artifact. The young man began to run around the storage and open all chests in a row. All these artifacts cost a lot of money. Pretty soon his ardor disappeared. There were still many useful things on the shelves, and nothing had accepted in his hands. Fortunately, the system was thought out by a spatial backpack for storing non-living objects. This option looked interesting. Opening a spatial backpack, Zhu Q threw everything that was in his hands there. There were any places in the backpack. The young man did not believe this at first, and then he laughed, and could not stop for a long time. This spatial backpack was his best find. Zhu Q began to methodically devastate all the cabinets and chests. On one of the objects, the backpack caught fire in red. The young man turned his head in surprise. It turns out that he has exhausted the limit of free cells. Zhu Q irritably sat on the floor and stared at the system warning. There were still many necessary things in the storage. The decision came by itself. In the backpack, pills took up a lot of space, and it was possible to simply use them for their intended purpose. At this time, Shilian approached the outer gate of the storage. He was asked to find pills for the next month. Opening the castle, Nalian entered the room. Behind the creaking door, he was surprised to find many empty bottles. There was not a single whole package. He constantly stumbled upon one or on a second empty bottle scattered on the floor. Having stepped on one of them, the minister realized that an outsider penetrated into the clan's storage. The hand immediately reached for the sword. The sound from opening the bottles echoed in the storage. Nalian demanded that the attacker immediately leave the shelter. Zhu Q stood kneeling, and handfuls swallowed valuable pills. He could not afford to leave at least something on this base. Nalian felt that the violator was very close. Putting the sword in front of him, he carefully walked in the direction of a strange sound. The young man heard steps and turned into a dilapidated. He had a full mouth of pills. Unfortunately, he did not have time to do everything on time. Nalian came closer and frowned, looking around the ruined storage. He angrily asked the stranger what was happening here. Shu Q realized that he was caught hot. He tried to swallow the next handful of pills. Nalian hid the sword behind his back and came closer. He carefully approached the young man closer and looked into his face. Zhu Q sat on the floor. Near him there were many devastated bottles from tablets. Nalian grabbed the sword and demanded an explanation. The situation was not in favor of the young man. After clarifying the system, Shui Qe made sure that he had another travel talisman and giggled. Getting up from the floor, he contemptuously told the minister, not turning to him, that he acts impolite, poking at him with a sword. The young man looked at him over his shoulder and added that he simply could not stand people who immediately exposed the sword. Nalian was surprised. Stunning the sword, he said that he had not even threatened him with his weapon. Something seemed to the young man. Nalian got angry and demanded to finish with this. The floor around him acquired a pink shade. The young man created an element of fire. Lian rushed to the attack. He screamed on the go that the robber himself was to blame for everything. It was not necessary to penetrate the storage. The keeper was an experienced fighter. The young man barely evaded his blows. In addition, once, Lian cut a piece of shirt on his chest with a sword. Most of all, the young man was annoyed by the fact that everyone he faced certainly tried to kill him. It was impossible to agree with anyone. Zhu said that it was not necessary to act so rudely with him. He does not attack anyone and does not harm. Calling the element of the earth to help, the young man soared high into the air. Outside of the Earth's orbit, two rivals flew towards each other. Zhu was ready to deliver a decisive blow to the enemy and defeat the keeper. He took a fighting rack on the fly. At the last moment, the body of the young man refused. He could not reach his enemy who prepared a sharp sword. Choking in the cough, Shueqiu lay on the floor and could not get up. Lian exposed his sword and looked in surprise at the young man. The keeper was worried. Something very strange happened to this young man. He needs medical care. Zhu did not answer. He could not even get up from the floor. Due to an overdose, he was tearing blood. At any moment, the young man could die. At some point, Lian suspected that the young man was only simulating a cough with blood and stated that he would not be able to spend. The keeper came closer and liked it. The young man was nearly choked. His hands were sprayed with blood, and an empty bottle fell out of his bosom. Lian scaredly suggested that the young man swallowed all those pills. It was like an attempt to suicide. Fortunately, the system came to the rescue and offered to activate self-healing. The young man agreed. Continuing to cough, Zhu found out that the system would consume 1 point of deception every 2 hours to restore the body. In addition, it turned out that existing knowledge is not enough. The breathing young man said that he needs to buy a book. With difficulty lifting his head up, Zhu demanded to immediately show him the book. It turned out that she costs as many as 100 points of deception. Such an amount simply angered a young man. Even deceiving all day, he could not accumulate enough points for the purchase. Lian came even closer. The young man was kneeling and writhed in pain. Lian lowered his sword and looked at the young man. He noticed that the guy was suffering, and even regretted him a little. In the case of a young man, quick death would be the best deliverance from torment. Lian sighed. Now the guy was defenseless, but he simply has no other way out. The man brought the sword to strike. Suddenly, Shueqiu spoke. This was given to him with great difficulty. The whole body trembled. Blood continued to drip from her mouth. The young man was sweating. At that moment, Lian was a little scared. Tell the elder about the incident. He mentioned that the guy was not like himself. At that moment, Shueqiu had a moment of enlightenment. He raised his head and looked at the keeper with his eyes distraught with overdose. Nailing swore that after that a huge yellow hole appeared. The young man shouted that he would go to hell, for there was no one else. A huge white flash appeared, blinding the keeper. Lian, covering his eyes, came closer. There is nothing left in place of the guy. Lian looked sadly at the place where the boy was. Everything could be different. The young man chose a completely different way. He was simply self-destructive so that no one else was caused by trouble. Lian remembered the last words of the young man, and he was trembling. That replica was really prophetic. So the evening came. The travel amulet this time moved the dying young man to the slope of the mountain. He spent a bloody hand on the trunk of the nearest tree. Turning his back to the tree, Shueqiu sank to the ground and leaned against him. A mountain river flowed nearby. It was possible to rinse the wounds. The young man exhausted his eyes, exhausted. He was pleased that he was able to escape from the storage. That minister almost chopped off his head. The system instantly charged a point for deception. Shueqiu sighed heavily. The second book was insanely expensive. The young man held his hand on his chest, trying to muffle the pain. Those tablets that he drank burned him like strong alcohol. Shueqiu opened his eyes and called the system. A large screen appeared in front of him with all the indicators of his health. Inside the young man, as if an entire world exploded. He screamed and demanded that the system urgently come up with a plan to restore the body. The system immediately informed the surprised Shueqiu that the plan for his salvation has long been ready. The young man was delighted and poked his finger at the screen. The system kindly provided a whole guide to break the meridian. At first glance, it sounded very strange, the young man thought. The system clearly could not offer him the path of suicide. Having carefully studied the book, Shueqiu realized that it was a question of learning to rationally use energy in his body. This method proposed a complete restoration of the body and also improved its indicators, but required complete solitude. Suku has uneasy only from one thought that he would have to go through pain and suffering to restore the body. Unfortunately, the choice was small. At least after that, he will return to a normal life. The young man concentrated all the energy in 2 fingers. Suku quickly pressed his fingers to his shoulder and groaned with severe pain. Something exploded in the shoulder. The whole body burned with fire. The heart was knocking frantically. The young man could not stand on his feet and exhaustedly knelt down. He again began to cough with blood. Moreover, due to a breakdown of meridian, the young man opened severe nasal bleeding. The head was sick, as if with a hammer along it. The shouts of the young man were heard throughout the forest district. In hellish torment, Suikyu spent 2 days and 2 nights. On one of the following days, he was awakened by sunlight. Herring, the young man slowly opened his eyes. The sun was injected into his eyes. It turned out that she was on the bed under an open window in a small room. Immediately, there was a puffer for washing and a large closet. Suikyu smiled. He managed to survive. The young man tried to sit on the bed. His whole body was in bandages. The hand was very ill, and he fell on the bed again. Suikyu was very dissatisfied with the quality of the dressing. Blood continued to ooze through bandages. In addition, he felt like a mummy. The door opened. A girl entered the room. She said that Suikyu stayed unconscious for several days. The young man blushed. A beautiful stranger with dark hair on his hand had a basket with fruits. She told that she found a young man on a mountain in a pool of blood. The girl put the basket on the table and reproached the young man. In the mountains you should not be for no special reason. There are wild animals. Seeing that the young man extended his hands from under the blanket, Xiaojiao went up to him and smiled. She suggested that the guy was recovering. The girl had such cute blue eyes that Suikyu immediately fell in love with her. He had never met such beauties. Xiaoju said that they are now in the village of Panshan. You should not worry. They will scare away all wild animals. Suikyu immediately rose, overcoming the pain. He introduced himself to the girl and proudly stated that he was not afraid of anyone. Having gaped, the young man said that he was actually a hunter, and on that mountain for 3 days and 3 nights fought with the wolves. The girl was very surprised and replied that wolves were never found on that grief. The young man hastened to transfer the conversation to another topic. He looked at Xiaozhou right in the eye and called her a gentle fairy who saved him from faithful death. The girl rounded her eyes in surprise. The young man closed his eyes and in a quiet voice gently thanked the stranger. He was really in a dying state then. The girl blushed and immediately turned away. She exclaimed that she was not a fairy. Her name is Xiaozhou. Suikyu opened his eyes and solemnly announced that Xiaozhou would now be his fairy. The girl turned to him again. Her breath caught her. Without saying a word, embarrassed by Xiaozhou ran out of the room. Suikyu himself was covered with a blush. The girl was very sweet. Xiaozhou ran into the forest and stopped by the tree. It was necessary to calm down. Meanwhile, the young man received 2 more points for a successful deception. Causing the system menu, Suikyu, in surprise for himself, learned that from the initial step of the breakthrough, he was on the middle. Most likely, it was in broken meridians. The young man sat on the bed more comfortably and ordered the system to begin self-healing. A minute later, Suikyu frowned. For this action, the system removed the point of deception from him, which were obtained with difficulty. However, the system honestly worked out the glasses spent on it. Around the young man's body was a golden glow. He felt better. Suikyu sighed in relief. He felt more strongly and clenched his fist. The bandages on the hand cracked. Under them there was a healthy body. From muscle tension, the bandages cracked all over the body. The young man was completely healthy and became physically stronger. Suikyu approached the basket on the table. He was pleased that he was again full of strength. It was hard to imagine that recently he could not move. At that moment, Xiaozhou looked at the door. Seeing a naked guy, she immediately blushed. Her heart was beating stronger. The girl slammed the door and made a strange sound. Suikue Polotilo, he did not like the Juda, an unpleasant situation. Covering the lower abdomen with his hand, the young man shouted that he could explain everything. Xiaozhou just misunderstood him. Closing his hand, the pale Suikyu reached out with his other hand to the girl. He asked to listen to him carefully. Xiaozhou closed her eyes. She was ashamed to look. According to the doctor, the young man could not get out of bed for another month. Having finally guessed to cover up at least a blanket, Suikyu pulled over the old gray sheet. She was all in patches. Throwing a sheet over himself, the young man said that in fact his wounds were trifling and asked to give him some clothes. The girl still could not move away from a strong shock. She thought for a while and promised to find something. When Xiaozhou went out the door, The young man went impatiently around the room. He was eager to start his acquaintance with the new world. A few minutes later, Shueqiu sat on the bed and sighed. He found that the sheet smells pleasantly, and enjoyed the smell. 10 minutes passed. The girl never returned. Shueqiu was alert. Unpleasant thoughts climbed into his head. He began to suspect that Xiaozhou complained of him other inhabitants of the village, and decided to carefully look out. Slowly opening the door, Shueqiu realized that the girl was not in the house. She did not respond. There was a suspicious silence around. Looking out of the window, the young man was surprised to see the empty streets. There was not a soul on the village streets, although all the houses stood nearby. All the houses were small and unpretentious. Nearby was a covered corral for livestock. The young man liked this place. It was comfortable here. Only one question did not give him rest. Local residents were not visible anywhere. Suddenly, a clang and a roar was heard very close. Visited peasants with braids and hoes appeared on the horizon. They were going to save Xiaozhou from some cattle. As soon as he heard the word offended for himself, the young man flared up. He turned to the offenders and shouted that in vain they insulted him. Shueqiu yelled that they themselves were looking for problems, and showed the peasants the middle finger. One of them was surprised to recognize the guy at death. Grabbing Shueqiu by the shoulders, he pushed him towards the house, and stated that they would deal with the beast themselves. Other men laughed. The young man was surprised to understand that he was mistaken. It turned out that it was not about him. A ferocious beast came down from the foot of the mountain. The man brought the young man back to the house and put him on a chair. He promised that the village after the murder of the beast would arrange a feast. Shueqiu asked men about a wild beast. A closet caught his eye. Perhaps there will be suitable clothes. Unfortunately, in the closet there was only bedding and some kind of red matter with embroidered gold flowers. There was nothing better. There was a terrible roar in the village. From a huge cloud of dust, a wild roar of a ferocious beast was heard. The peasants were afraid to approach there. At that moment, Shueqiu appeared on the horizon. He proudly fled in red lingerie, and on his neck he tied a light gray cloak. To the surprise of the young man, thanks to his spectacular appearance, he earned 5 more points of deception from the system. The young man smiled, and then a huge beast roared. He looked like a horned tiger. Saliva dripped with his fangs. One of the peasants was assisted. He got it strongly from the beast that could tear all the iron shackles and break out. Xiaozhou stood right in the crowd and restrained the village inhabitants. She ordered all the inhabitants to immediately retreat. Seeing such a huge beast, Shueqiu was surprised. He had never seen such large specimens before. The young man ran closer and shouted at the top of his voice so that all the inhabitants move away from the beast and give way to him. All the inhabitants were at a loss when they saw a young man who shook his fists and shouted that he would deal with the tiger alone. Seeing the young man, Xiaozhou was surprised. She exclaimed that Shueqiu is better to return, he is not yet strong enough. Confidently making his way through the crowd, the young man pushed people in different directions. There was no time to explain. Every minute was on the account. The elder tried to stop the young man for the last time, and reminded that it would be difficult for him to cope after the wounds received. Shueqiu showed his muscles, and proudly replied that he had fought alone with 100 animals. The elder looked incredulously at the young man. Xiaozhou carefully looked at the young man. That red lingerie seemed familiar to her. Roaring loudly, the horned tiger raised a cloud of dust. With lightning attacks, a powerful beast broke spears and injured the attackers. All residents screamed. Now they saw the real power of a ferocious tiger. No one knew how to stop it. Raising his face up, the horned tiger roared angrily. From this sound, many have laid their ears. He angrily beat his tail with a scrap of a chain on the ground. Xiaozhou stood the closest to the beast. Loosing her arms to the sides, she did not allow the others to come closer. The beast jumped forward and released the claws. Xiaozhou turned pale. The elder and his close associates turned to the side. They did not want to see a torn girl. At that moment, a loud clatter of barefoot legs rang out in the threatening silence. Zhuezue bravely fled to meet the giant. He was scared behind Xiaozhou and rushed forward. The gray cape fluttered in the wind. You cannot let Teeper take the girl's life. With a wild roar, the beast approached closer. Xiaozhou already felt his hot breath from afar. Death was inevitable. The frightened girl turned to her younger sister and hugged her. Tears flowed down the cheeks. I did not want to die. They both trembled with fear. The horned tiger landed loudly right in front of Xiaozhou. A huge cloud of dust formed from the blow. Xiaozhou looked at the tiger. She did not live long. The horned beast stared menacingly with blood-wrapped eyes. Suddenly, Xiaozhou felt that someone had pushed her in the other direction. The girl cried out with displeasure, turning around. Xiaozhou was surprised to get a bit that Xiaoqiu had wedged between her and a wild beast and was preparing to fight him. Now the girl had no doubt that Xiaoqiu was badly injured. No sensible person will go to this. The young man turned around and winked at her. Seeing a new victim, the horned tiger roared loudly and stood on his hind legs. He waved his left paw and released his claws. Xiaoqiu fled and jumped towards Tiger, ahead of his actions. The young man struggled with his foot with a huge beast in his throat. Xiaoqiu put all his strength into this blow. The horned tiger fell to the ground and drove several meters on his side, tearing his own skin. The young man stood, bending his leg at his knee, and silently watched the giant tiger. A powerful flow of energy circulated at his feet. All the peasants could not believe their eyes and began to discuss how the young man could throw a wild beast with only one blow of the leg. The system immediately accrued the young man of 6 more points of deception for a successfully fraud. Xiaoqiu frowned. That giant beast was so thick-skinned that after the blow his leg was numb, and for several seconds the young man did not feel her. Without turning around, the young man shouted to Xiaozhou, standing nearby, that it becomes very dangerous here, and she needs to go away. The angry tiger woke up and began to get up from the ground. Shuizui rushed towards him. None of the inhabitants should suffer anymore. The young man clenched his fist and concentrated energy. As soon as the tiger approached, the guy hit him with his fist. The tiger flew away with a mournful howl. Xiaoqiu, this was not enough. He jumped after the flying beast and landed with force on his side. The tiger roared long. The elder smiled pretty. In his lifetime, he saw such skill for the first time. At the same time, the flying young man did not receive a scratch. Xiaozhou cautiously watched a deadly fight and saw every blow. The elder thought that the young man could cope with the immortal. Xiaoqiu triumphantly put his foot on the defeated tiger and bent his hand in the brush. The system accrued awards for a wild beast. Many drops of water appeared from the skin of the beast. Standing to the young man, they turned into ki energy. The system provided the young man with another big gift. Xiaoqiu was delighted. For this beast, he received a lot of experience. It turned out that killing animals is much more effective than swallowing pills. Residents of the village grabbed the young man and began to throw him up. The population thanked the hero with might and main, continuing to throw him up. The young man said that he was ready to fight with any wild beast. Residents continued to throw Xiaoqiu up. At that moment, his gray cape was blown away by the wind. One man said that he was very strong. The young man helped to go down to the ground. He bashfully covered his nipples with his hands. 2 girls were so far away. The guy was pretty. Xiaozhou stared at the young man's clothes. That red material was very similar to her favorite apron. The elder asked Xiaozhou to bring the young man clothes. The embarrassed girl immediately brought Xiaoqiu a little clothes. The girl's face was red as boiled cancer. She was worth a lot of difficulty approaching the young man and handing clothes. Xiaozhou looked at her feet. Shuizui sincerely thanked the girl and smiled. To his surprise, she turned around coldly and went away. One of the women called him to her. Pointing to the young man's red linen, she said that it looks like an apron of Xiaozhou. The apron of this form used to be the subject of underwear instead of bras. He is also known as Mo's son. Xiaoqiu realized that he was in a very awkward position. He tried to pretend that he did not understand what was at stake. Having slapped himself on the forehead, the young man said that he remembered urgent matters. Shuizui ran away as quickly as he could. Women laughed at him for a long time, looking at his back. Their laughter was very contagious, and soon the whole village laughed. To the sunset of the sun, Xiaoqiu came to the place where Xiaozhou discovered him. Putting his back on a stone, the young man basking in the water. After a while, he became bored. Xiaoqiu activated the system and asked to show his current indicators. The level of his skill was still insignificant, and the necessary glasses were not enough. Xiaoqiu recalled that there was also a store in the system. The store had 4 open menus. It was possible to improve weapons or armor, or study the ability or buy tablets. Xiaoqiu began to leaf through the subsections of the main menu. Over time, he figured out how this store and system are arranged. The first level goods cost up to 5 points, and they could be bought. Suddenly, the young man saw that the last 2 levels were closed. The system immediately said that this part of the store is blocked due to the low level of the player himself. Now, Xiaoqiu understood. There are higher skills than the 4th level offers. Unfortunately, now he could only allow the initial goods. After reading 9 lonely swords about the first skill, the young man almost fell into the water in surprise. This advanced skill was only the 1st level. The young man plunged into cool water around the neck. Xiaoqiu occurred that he simply understood something wrong. Choosing skills of the second level, the young man exclaimed enthusiastically. He almost bought one of the skills, but decided to view all the goods. The evening has come. Shueqiu only now got out of the water and began to dress. The assortment was large. He had not chosen anything yet. The young man jumped onto a tree and got comfortable. Having bitten a little juicy apple, he moved to the third category. As soon as I opened the substitution with the skills of the category of DI, Shueqiu almost choked on an apple and spat out all the contents. Having wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his clothes provided to him, the young man read the names of skills in this category. Shueqiu could not believe his eyes. Everything that was on the screen was definitely useful. He dealt with this earlier. In this category, there were skills known to him. Having bitten another piece of apple, Shueqiu peered tensely at the screen. Any of these skills was enough to get an instant advantage in this world. The young man was sitting on a branch and thinking. He could buy some of these books, but the choice should be as effective as possible. At the foot of a stub from the apple, Shueqiu looked at the ruler in the store. She cost twice as many points than he had. Considering that the young man is still very weak, it would be ideal to find the ability to accelerated physical strength. The white screen of the system was replaced by a dark blue. Golden rays from the screen seemed to penetrate the consciousness of Shueqiu himself. His body became light, like a fluff. The golden spiral carried him up. From surprise, the young man dropped a stub of an apple. A golden glow appeared around the body of Shueqiu. This was the first stage of skills at which the user received increased strength. In the second stage, force doubled. Feeling this, the young man involuntarily clenched his fist. Now he could crumble a stone into dust. At the last stage, Shueqiu felt an unprecedented surge of energy. His strength increased 9 times. The golden spiral again wrapped her young man's body and began to move him from the star orbit to the Earth's firmament. Closing his eyes, Shueqiu sighed in relief. On a solid surface, he felt more confident. The young man carefully examined his hands and was a little disappointed. It seemed to him that when receiving the skill, he should feel differently. Jiza clenched his fists and strained the muscles. Nevertheless, something has changed. He felt a surge of strength. The young man smiled joyfully. He comfortably settled on a wide branch of a tree and relaxed. Closing his eyes, the young man remembered that he had a gift from the system. Shueqiu moves closer to the trunk of a tree and leaned on it. He wondered what could be in that random gift. Exhausted from desire, the young man tried to guess. He imagined beautiful girls with powerful weapons and strong bodyguards. Shueqiu could not stand it and joyfully shouted. He wanted to get something special. Unfortunately, a travel talisman fell. The young man immediately stopped laughing. He could not believe that he had some unnecessary camouflage doll and processing skills. Shueqiu indignantly yelled that this is very few. He needs a girl guide or at least a weapon of a mythical category. The camouflage doll was generally like a children's toy. The young man doubted that this could be a valuable acquisition. Taking a closer look at the doll, Shueqiu was surprised to realize that he was mistaken. In fact, it is much stronger than it seems. He remembered the king of the country Huan and the patriarch of sect Tianwu. Both of them were at a strong level of Yuan skills. The young man peered into the screen and spilled a list of gifts. He asked the system what about processing there. Shueqiu asked what kind of processing glasses these were and why they were needed at all. The system immediately issued information. It turned out that the system can all the things that are unnecessary to the player in objects for improvements. The young man sighed, and the system described in detail. For example, the magical processing of weapons gives improvement tokens and allows you to improve weapons of any category. The magical processing of tablets has its own tokens and allows you to improve the quality and cleanliness of the tablets. With the help of processing skills, you can clear the skills and thus accelerate the development of other skills. Shueqiu's hands under the head and thought. In a spatial backpack, almost the entire treasury of the Tianwu clan was stored. The young man smiled. He decided to process several items and sell the rest. The time was later. Shueqiu stretched sweetly and yawned. Closing the system menu, the young man jumped from a high tree. In general, everything went well. He was pleased with the gifts. Having landed, Shueqiu went to the mountain river. He crouched on the shore and washed. Drops of water fell into the water, forming concentric circles. Seeing his display in the water, the young man involuntarily admired himself. His face was very beautiful. It is not surprising that everyone looked at him. Of course, only the prince of the empire can have such a strong and powerful body that cannot be hidden with simple clothes. The young man went out onto the hill and looked at the village. From here was an attractive appearance. The guy liked it more and more here. Entering the house of Xiaozhou, He saw that the girl was inclined with a blanket in her hands. The young man opened the door and called the surprised Xiao Zhao. Xu Kui quickly went to the girl and asked to move aside. He will do everything himself. Xiao Zhou blushed. The girl stepped back and sat on a chair. She watched embarrassedly as Yue Qiu leaned over and carefully took the blanket in his hands. At that moment, when Xiao Zhou wanted to make a remark to the young man, they both heard some loud sound and turned to the door. A strange sound was repeated several more times. Xu Qiu turned pale and suggested that this was another wild beast. Without hesitation for a minute, the young man rushed to the exit to find out what was happening and ordered the hostess to sit at home and not to stick out. Xu Qiu ran out of the courtyard of Xiao Zhao. The girl ran after him. She had already managed to become attached to the young man. Xiao Zhou struggled to catch up with Xu Qiu. She held her hands to him on the run and asked to wait. At this time, the inhabitants of 3 residents of the village of Bei Shui, located near the murdered tiger, were ambushed. They wanted to take away the carcass of the beast. A man with short black antennae and beard only smiled contemptuously when he was asked about the rights to the animal. The man was armed with a sword like a huge butcher knife. Behind him stood 3 thugs ready for a fight. The peasants were armed only with sticks. One of them shouted that men have no evidence that the tiger was from their village. A man with a beard held out his hand with a sword in front of him. His sharp blade shone ominously in the moonlight. The peasants turned pale. The man grinned. He was ready to admit that he was taking the murdered beast, but they would still do nothing to him. The peasants began to whisper. That man was the son of the elder from a neighboring village. On the other hand, Danny's day was approaching. One of the men decided to fight with Pan Bao and sent the youngest to the village for help, hoping to detain the rivals. Pan Bao got angry. He hoped to resolve the conflict without bloodshed. The man accepted the combat rack and looked menacingly at the defenders. Pan Bao made a barely noticeable movement, and his deadly weapon described a semicircle, making an accurate blow. The peasant held the club tightly in his hands. To his surprise, he only in the last second noticed the approach of the sword. With a quick blow of the sword, Pan Bao cut the batons in half, which the peasants held in their hands. The peasants themselves scattered from the blow in different directions. The bodies of the peasants sank to the ground with a roar. Pan Bao turned around and said that no number of peasants would stop him. The thugs began to lively glorify Pan Bao. Even God himself could not completely block his blow. Pan Bao himself stood his back to defeated opponents, motionlessly lying on the ground. The man said that no one would cope with Pan Bao. An alien voice demanded to stop carrying nonsense. Pan Bao turned out to be embittered. Sui Qiu leisurely approached him. The young man frowned at Pan Bao. There was not a shadow of fear in his eyes. Sui Qiu suggested that a man was looking for troubles. Pan Bao turned his head to the young man and frowned. No one in the vicinity allowed himself to be so offended. Ignoring him, Sui Qiu ran to the peasants and helped to rise. The young man smiled and promised to take care of everything. Supporting each other, the wounded peasants slowly went towards their village. The young man turned to Pan Bao. Smiling broadly, Sui Qiu said that he could be understood incorrectly. In fact, he believes that they are all worth nothing. He managed to get Pan Bao from half a turn. An angry man quickly waved his sword. The young man was waiting for this and walked back in time. Pan Bao waved fiercely, trying to deceive the opponent. But the sword dissected only the air, and there was not a scratch on the young man. Taking a heavy sword with both hands, Pan Bao jumped towards the enemy and tried to cut him in half. The young man dodged again. The man was finally angry. It was time to open the cards. Pan Bao began quickly rotated in a circle, creating a magic spiral. Sui Qiu tried to break free, but the protective wall did not let him out. Pan Bao quickly soared up. His enemy had nowhere to run. Having reached a peak height, Pan Bao swung a sword and solemnly stated that now the young man was definitely the end. With a great speed, the man rushed down his enemy. His rapid fall caused a big explosion. The earth rose. Large stones flew out of a huge cloud of dust and scattered in different directions. The peasants hid. When the dust was scattered, the wounded peasants and Xiao Zhao came closer. The village worried for the life of the young men. The girl with fear in her voice called Yue Qiu. She did not want to believe that something bad could happen to him. Pan Bao heard the girl's melodic voice and turned in bewilderment. He stood in the recess created by his fall. Only when he saw Xiao Zhao, Pan Bao giggled embarrassedly. He did not even suspect that such a beauty was living in the village. The embarrassed Xiao Zhao was horrified by the approach of Pan Bao. He held out his hand to her and stated that he was taking the girl with him. Suddenly, someone's hand in dark ends tightly grabbed Pan Bao's hand by the bandaged wrist. The surprised man only at the last moment saw a young man too close to him. A powerful blow forced Pan Bao to lose balance. His large body flew a few meters from the peasants. The man landed with a roar. A large cloud of dust arose at the place of his fall. The girl looked excitedly in that direction. Shu Qiu stroked Xiao Jiao on the head and promised to teach the hooligans. The girl blushed densely with embarrassment. Slowly rising from the ground, Pan Bao cursed the young man. Shui Qiu asked the peasants to find a secluded place and hide. Waving a huge two-handed sword, the angry Pan Bao shouted that he was tired of playing. He would kill the young man. Shu Qiu smiled and activated the skill of a soaring dragon. With the help of this battle, he will experience his skills. Despite the fact that the young man's skill was only at the first level, Pan Bao turned pale, seeing how the young man's body lit up. Energy was exuded from his fists. Both enemies sought to finish the duel as early as possible. They agreed in close combat, sizzling each other's eyes. At this very moment, Shu Qiu released a powerful stream of energy of a soaring dragon into his opponent. It was impossible to evade him. A blinding eye stream was rapidly approaching a surprised man, turning into a huge luminous dragon on the move. Pan Bao did not have time to fight with a young man. Dozens of rays penetrating his body were reflected in his eyes. The battle was over, and the energy dragon disappeared. Shui Qiu remained standing in place with a fist thrown forward. To his surprise, the young man heard the voice of the system and learned about the calculation of awards for the murder of a man named Pan Bao. Surprised Shui Qiu could not believe it. His new skill was really good and deserved the spaces spent. The cloud of dust was scattered. The young man looked in surprise at the defeated enemy. The peasants were struck by the fact that they saw the dragon. Everyone who came to the rescue of the peasants fell to their knees in front of the young men and began to beg for forgiveness, calling him immortal. Xu Qiu panicked. He could not understand what was happening and why the peasants behaved so strangely. 4 peasants fell and trembled with fear of young men. They were afraid to even raise their heads. Pale, Shui Qiu asked what they were doing. He approached and asked the peasants to immediately get out of the ground. To the surprise of the young man, the inhabitants of the village did not even raise their heads. Xu Qiu looked at the sides bewildered. He asked Xiao Zhou to explain what was happening and forced the peasants to rise. The girl looked at him with a strange look. The universal panic was transmitted to her. Soothing, she said that the young man belongs to the immortal. Now Xu Qiu did not understand anything at all. The young man asked what the immortals were like. Xu Qiu approached Xiao Zhou. He tried his best to convince the peasants that he was the same person as all people. The young man laid his arms embarrassed on his shoulders and said that she had nothing to fear. He asked her to explain what was happening here. Xiao Zhou thought about it. She did not know where to start. In addition, she herself was a little afraid of the young man and his belonging to the immortal. Xu Qiu, meanwhile, ordered the peasants to immediately get out of the ground. The young man could no longer look at how they worship him. It turned out that the whole thing is in the Tianwu clan. Their huge complex of buildings is located in the east of the village of Panshan. Monthly peasants are obliged to present Tianwu as a tribute to food and drinks. The guards of the clan carefully monitor this. In case of disobedience, the Tianwu sect takes the strongest inhabitants of the village to him, and no one will see them anymore. Now Xu Qiu understood everything. Those sectarians only pretend to be strong, but in fact they offend those who are weaker than them. His hands clenched into his fists by themselves, the body shook. Suddenly an excited man ran to the young man and the girl. Lighting the path to himself by a torch, he asked how the peasants feel after the attack of the thugs Pan Bao. Xiao Zhou replied that everything was fine with them. The man scaredly said that they needed to rush. The village is in danger. More precisely, Xu Qiu himself is in danger. The immortals came to the village of Panshan and are looking for him. It turned out that all over the village, announcements about the search with the image of a young man were hung. The immortals came for him. Xiao Zhou was frightened. The young man could not understand how the sectarians of Tianwu managed to track him so quickly. The man said that there was nowhere to hide in the village itself, and ordered the girl to go underground. Shui Qiu worried about the village. They may have problems. Xiao Zhou exclaimed that Shui Qiu saved the village of Panshan several times, and now their turn to help the young man. At this time, 5 immortals, standing on swords in the air, frowned at the crowd of village inhabitants. One of the guests dressed in white clothes recalled the announcement of the search, and asked if they saw this person. The pale elder, leaning on a copper staff, stepped forward. He made an attempt to save the young man. The old man assured the immortals that all the inhabitants of the village gathered here. None of them saw a person who looked like a young man from an ad. The man frowned. He knew for sure that the young man he wanted was hiding somewhere nearby. The immortal extended his hand to the side. A huge sword with several cutting surfaces arose from a red cloud near it. People began to scream that it was pure truth. The elder was covered later. In the eyes of the immortal, he understood everything. The immortal frowned. The inhabitants had to be studied. He concentrated the internal energy on the tip of the sword. Having made a semicircle, the sword flew up to the elder and cut his body along with the copper staff that the old man held. The peasants immediately ran to the elder lying on the ground in a pool of their own blood. It was no longer possible to help him. All 5 immortals called on punishing swords. The leader said that all the inhabitants would die for disobedience. All swords flew towards the surprised peasants. They were rapidly approaching, and no miracle could save the inhabitants. The peasants were horrified by their unenviable fate. They perfectly understood that they could not hide from these swords anywhere. Meanwhile, Xiao Zhao led the young man along the underground tunnel. Shui Qiu asked how far to go. Suddenly there was a roar. The underground room swayed greatly. Xiao Zhou and the young man barely resisted their feet. After listening, Shui Qiu heard the pleas of peasants on the street. The young man turned pale. He immediately realized what was happening behind the wall. Having clenched his fists, Shui Qiu dug in the opposite direction. He could not stand aside. The girl carefully laid her hand on top. Xiao Zhou in fright reported that they needed to immediately go along the corridor. And the inhabitants are all right. Shu Qiu turned around and exclaimed that he could not run away with his tail. After that, he will cease to respect himself. The young man resolutely pulled out his hand and ran to the exit. A full chaos took place on the street. The sectarians killed innocent people. The surviving residents begged them to leave them alive. Many cried and shouted. Some raised their hands up, immediately surrendering. The leader of the immortal, who began to gray, looked coldly at the peasants and called on another sword. Having his hand, he launched the sword into the crowd. Shu Qiu appeared on time and obscured civilian from punishing swords flying in the air. The young man asked the peasants to bend their heads lower. Saving innocent inhabitants, Shui Qiu took a blow to himself. All swords have reached their goal. A flash arose at the collision site. All the peasants screamed in fright. This guy was their only support, and it was impossible to lose the defender of the village. Despite the fact that Shu Qiu survived, he received very serious damage and now coughing with blood. His whole body bleed. Shui Zue barely stood on his feet and could not say for a long time how long he would be able to stretch. One of the sectarians was surprised to recognize the guy. It turned out that the master was not mistaken. They came to the right place. Shu Qiu turned to the inhabitants and asked them all to hide somewhere, for his sake should not be sacrificed with their lives. The gray-haired leader grinned and reproached the young man of cowardice. All those deaths could be avoided if he had come earlier. The man smiled barely noticeably. He perfectly understood that now the offender of their clan could not escape. Shu Qiu looked at the frightened village inhabitants and said that he used to love to get in front of the others. The young man turned to the sectarians and stated that he had previously done this with great satisfaction. Today, everything was different. He could escape. The leader of the sect in all ears listened carefully to the young man. He suspected that Shui Qiu was trying to simply hide his vigilance. At this moment, the young man yelled that sometimes it was simply impossible not to work out, and raised his hand high, showing the leader the middle finger. One of the sectarians immediately bowed respectfully in front of the master. He personally wanted to deal with the guy. The leader frowned. He warned the student that Sui Qiu should survive. They would need to interrogate the insolent. The young man quickly called the system menu and said that he had never dropped to beat innocent people. Shu Qiu chose the desired point in the store, continuing to insult the Tianwu clan and his inappropriate techniques. After a few seconds, using the processing, the young man managed to improve the incident dragon to the maximum. Shu Qiu concentrated qi energy in his right hand and vowed that none of the sectarians would be able to leave the village alive. The first student dived on a young man from heaven like a mountain eagle. Going down in the sword, he called on the path weapons. Fleeting to him, Shui Qiu hit him with his knee in the chest. Holding the sectarian who lost consciousness, the young man hit him on the head. The cultivators moved indignantly. They well saw that the fight ended too quickly in their favor. Shu Qiu landed to his knees. For the murder of the sectarian of the fundamental level, he received as many as 8,000 points of experience. Now immediately 2 cultivators rushed to the young man. Their brother was not so experienced, so there is nothing to be proud of the young man. Shui Qiu began to rise from his knees. He just finished lifting his level of a soaring dragon and felt a surge of strength. The young man threw his hand forward. It seemed that electric discharges came from his palm. His whole body lit up like a bright light. something dazzlingly bright, comparable to lightning, pierced sectarians. With screams, they released their swords. Zhu continued to fly forward with clenched fists. In a fellow, he destroyed 2 followers of the nucleus level. The leader of the sectarians turned pale. This could not be true. 2 well-trained warriors died in less than a minute. A premonition of close death made him sweat. The man exclaimed that he was returning to the base to report to the elders. The leader directed his sword in the opposite direction, intending to run away. The remaining sectarian was ready to cover his withdrawal. Xueqiu laughed. He just received a new skill, and was going to prove to the cultivators that he would not let anyone go alive. The young man felt more and more. In addition, the system proposed to add thunder to his lightning skill. Xueqiu smiled. The young man politely refused. For fair revenge, he is quite enough for his skills. The sectarian stepped back, concentrating energy on the go. He screamed that the young man went too far, he better give up. Su Xu rushed to his enemy. The sectarian put up a sword and demanded immediately to return the stolen jewelry. If the sectarian survived, he would say that, along with a blow to the chest, he felt a strong blow to the head. The young men were everywhere. The lifeless minister fell from heaven to earth. Xueqiu went down and took the award for his murder. Suddenly, the young man saw the screaming leader of the sectarians. Having activated the skill of lightning, Xueqiu shot up over him. The cultivator was very surprised at great speed, seeing the young man right in front of him, and immediately stopped. The leader turned pale, anticipating a quick reprisal, and tried to compromise. He will not tell anyone about what happened. The sectarian looked unkindly at the young man, and said that in the event of his death, everything would only get worse. He would still be found and destroyed. The man wanted to add that the heavenly sect entrusted him to find the young man, but did not have time. He began to cough with blood. Without wasting time for meaningless conversations, Xueqiu with a lightning speed pierced the leader of the sectarians, through and through the 5. The young man severely declared a dying man that his speeches could be useful to those residents of the village he killed. Xueqiu pulled a bloodied hand from the torso of the sectarian, and the man flew down, dropping his sword. His fate was a foregone conclusion. The frowning young man found out that for this cultivator he received twice as many experience as a reward. There was plentiful rain. Water dragged through the hair of Xiaozhou, and she walked with half-closed eyes, wiping her wet eyelids. Suddenly, there was a crack. Seeing the young man alive, the inhabitants were surprised. Xiaozhou immediately rushed to him. The girl was worried about the life of Xueqiu, and was very glad to see him again. Her eyes gave out a strong affection for the young man. Shizui turned away. He was ashamed to look in the eyes. The young man kneeled down limply, feeling guilty. Xueqiu bowed to the unfortunate that the sectarians managed to kill, and solemnly stated that he would defend the village. One of the saved men put his hand on his shoulder. The man said that without a young man, a village would not have been long ago. Xiaozhou sadly looked at the young man and said that they were doomed. Expensive taxes destroyed their population. Xueqiu smiled timidly, and promised that now none of the cultivators could go to the village of Panshan. The young man thought. What he was now was unfamiliar. Xueqiu decided that this was a sense of duty to the village. The young man was thinking that the salvation of the inhabitants depends on him only. He swore to himself until the end of his days to defend the village. Strong rain quickly ended. The inhabitants of the village left the shelters and gave the last honors to the dead, buried in a large crypt. After the morning ceremony, Xueqiu returned to the house and called the system menu to view his status. The last battle was successful for the young man. For the murder of the followers of the heavenly sect, he received more than 100,000 points of experience. Xueqiu thought. It was only a temporary success. There are still a lot of hunters, and the experience points need to be distributed carefully. Having thought a little, the young man came to the conclusion that he could not protect everyone, so it is necessary to make the village itself strongly. Xueqiu thought intensely. A new thought occurred to him. Xueqiu went to the system store to see the spells. It seemed to him that it would be easier and most reliable to install a murderous spell on the village, killing violators. To the surprise of the young man, the price for worthy spells was exorbitantly high, and demanded 100 times more experience than he had. Moreover, Xueqiu could not afford even a regular spell. He needed more stiff actions. The young man dejectedly took up his head. It was impossible to imagine how many sectarians have to be killed for the sake of a cheap spell. However, there were cheaper options. Xueqiu stopped on a spell of despair. It will also protect the village. The young man confidently pressed the purchase button. The red hexagon with a spell of despair found himself in his hand. Xueqiu smiled. With this spell, He will quickly deal with all the strangers who were eager for the death of the civilian population. According to the instructions for installing the spell, the blood of the beast should be shed. The young man was not sure that animals were found in the village. The hexagon with the spell disappeared. Shueqiu decided to spend the necessary glasses and buy a second book of 5 elements. As soon as the young man pressed the button, the system menu disappeared. There was a dazzling light on the screen, pouring the face of Shueqiu. An image of a black core appeared in the center of the screen. Bright rays diverged from him in different directions. The body of the young man rose into the air. Shueqiu experienced a powerful electric discharge and screamed with severe pain. His physical torment was justified. After an electric shock, the young man became stronger at once by several points. Electricity recharge is over. Shueqiu sank to the floor, dumping a chair along the way, and sighed in relief. He smiled. Nevertheless, the young man could not get rid of the thought that this did not resemble traditional cultivation. At that moment, Xiaojiao ran into the house and excitedly reported that trouble had occurred. The young man turned and asked what happened. The girl looked very frightened. According to her, many immortal cultivators fly towards the village. Shueqiu smiled. This is exactly what he needs now. There are never few experience and shopping experience in the store. The young man turned to the exit from the house, clenching his fists. He asked Xiaojiao to collect all the inhabitants. He needs their help. The girl at the last moment caught the edge of the Shueqiu sleeves, a confident step leaving the house. She said that among those immortals there is one strong cultivator, and therefore it is better not to contact them. Sadly bowing her head, the girl offered to leave the village at all. Cultivators will not be able to find them. Shueqiu turned around and looked sadly at the girl. He knew that the village of Panshan sheltered her after the loss of her parents. That is why Xiaojiao looked so sadly. She was very sorry to leave the village, which became his home. Shueqiu approached the girl closer and affectionately stroked Xiaojiao on the head, reassuring her and giving confidence. The embarrassed girl devotedly looked at Shueqiu. Smiling, the young man recalled that he vowed to protect the village. Shueqiu warmly looked at the girl and said that the strength of cultivators does not matter. He would cope with any of them. Xiaojiao wanted to say something. Looking into the eyes of a young man who removed her hand from her head, the girl decided that it was better not to argue. Shueqiu and Xiaojiao left the house. The detour of the whole village took some time. In addition, not everyone was at home. Having gathered in the center of the village of all whom he managed to find, the young man asked the residents to find the blood of some animals. One of the men immediately stated that they may have difficulties with the blood of the tiger. Another man confirmed his words. Shueqiu puzzledly scratched his head. He completely lost sight of the fact that the tigers are very aggressive and not to cope with residents. The young man turned to Xiaojiao and asked the surprised girl to stay with the rest of the inhabitants. He will protect the village. By releasing a strong electric discharge, Shueqiu rushed up. He needed to draw attention to himself. Quickly flying around the whole village of Panshan, the young man installed a spell in 4 directions. Now no one could get into the village. Shueqiu was pleased. Almost all preparations were completed. Suddenly he saw a flash in the sky and heard a pitch of thunder. The young man was a little sad. The cultivators appeared in the village much earlier than he expected. You need to detain them. The 3 of the strongest cultivators, folding his hands behind her back, was approaching the village in which the wanted young man was hiding. One of them hastily reported to the bald and hot elder that the village of Panshan is in front of them. The elder ordered everyone else to fly closer. Several dozen students were now flying next to him. Flying to the top of the mountain, the cultivators noticed a strange young man in dark clothes by the tree. The elder recognized the thief and invited him to give up. Shueqiu smiled and waved his hand dismissively, offering them to surrender. The young man said they were afraid to go down. Hearing a rude insult, the elder turned white with anger. All other cultivators were ready to break the insolent. One of them with wild cries wanted to rush down, but the other sectarian stopped him, suspecting that they had a trap. He saw that the degree of cultivation of their enemy has reached the level of the nucleus. This suggested that the young man is not as simple as it seems. Cultivators were rustled lively. In a few days, the guy raised his level significantly. This explained the disappearance of sectarians. After a little thought, the elder gave the order to arrange a halt at the top of the mountain opposite the guy. In the village, they are ambushed. Dozens of cultivators changed their direction and headed to the top of the mountain. Shuezui was annoyed by them. One of the cultivators looked around at the young man and exclaimed that that guy really wanted to lure them closer. The second sectarian grinned. They were all very lucky. The elder Liu unraveled the idea of the young man in time, and they remained alive. The system accrued 5 points of deception. Suikyu was delighted that the sectarians came across very gullible and cleared his throat. The young man came out from behind a tree and conveyed the will of his master. All strangers who dare to approach the village will be destroyed. The elder frowned. The sectarians of the highest rank looked at each other. Nobody told them that this ragged man has a master. The whole sect froze in anticipation. Who was the master of Shui? The guy, unable to restrain himself, loudly, after which he assured the others that they just needed to angry him and the masters so that they began to act. Such a disrespect was greatly angry the whole sect. They yelled loudly and randomly that they were ready to break the weak Shui for his words. But the elder among those present noted that the guy was only provoking them. The whole crowd was even more angry and furiously began to look at the guy with fists. This whole situation made fun of this whole situation. Because in addition to everything that was happening, he also received 20 points of experience. The guy continuing to mock, taking one hand behind his back and standing on one leg, simultaneously offering to fight him in a huge advantage, both in his collection and in power. With a sigh, Su looked into the distance, and for a second thought that apparently he was not destined to lose, and he would remain invincible until the end of his days. While Jue had fun with the sectarians, the whole village in a pace continued to fulfill the task. All residents fussed in pursuit to have time. Some men tried to catch the entire terrestrial living creature, and the other part took the plants. In the end, residents managed to fulfill the order and collect the right amount of blood for their Mr. Zhu. The whole crowd gathered in the square did not quite understand why they made this assignment. They were all connected by a common goal to get rid of the overhanging threat of the cultists. Xiu asked the inhabitants not to worry and reminded that they would protect them on their own. At that moment, Shui was sitting on a stone, slightly thought about what was happening. The guy suggested that the village had already fulfilled his order to collect the required amount of blood. Not wanting to continue to stay in the company of sectarians, he calls those discharges, and in a hurry, leaves the crowd. With great speed, the guy leaves the sectarians in an unknown direction. The elders of the sect, standing behind, continued to think about what was happening and analyze which master the guy told them about. At this moment, one of the sectarians added that he understood everything, and decides to talk about the famous cultivator around the world of Duan Jude. The man decides to tell everything that the cultivator knows about this and compares it with the SC, noticing similarities. It seems strange to many sectarians, because the great cultivator Duan Jude Vriatli arrived in such a distant wilderness in search of a student. At this moment, Shui with ease and using only one blow overcame a huge tiger. The guy makes a small incision in order to fill the container with blood for activation of the spell. Having reached the village of Shui in a hurry to the square to finish cooking, the guy notices one of the local men. Xue clarifies one of the elders, whether they collected the right amount of blood. The man points to all filled containers. Su, with a light movement of the hand, uses a spell on all 4 containers. Su asks all residents to stay in the square. The guy himself takes all the containers and rushes in an unknown direction. The guy moves through previously left flags, where he pours all the collected blood. Having reached the last yellow flag, the guy, as well as on other objects, pours all the blood from the container. Blood quickly began to turn off and transform into red phoenix. Returning back to the village of Shua activates the seal, after which the blue flame rises around the whole village. The whole village was neatly surrounded by a flame separating and protecting it from the outside world. The sectarians who were at that time on the mountain did not quite understand what was happening now, and who could use such a strong spell. The flame rise higher and higher, closing into a single dome. The sky gradually began to clear that the inhabitants immediately notice. The blue flame faded away, and a bright white flame appeared to replace it. People were shocked no less from such a strong spell of their defender. Having stood up at the head, publicly states that the sect people now will not disturb their village, because they are under a protective dome. Xiao previously helped Su with the organization of blood collecting the guy to stay with them, because it seemed to her more calmly. Zhu with a smile explains that everything that happens is done only so that Xiao feels safe. The guy also adds that he will not allow anyone to mock the girl. At that moment, the angry sectarians were indignant at what was happening, because they understood that the village had a patron that defended them. One of the senior sectarians noticed that Shui just distracted them, and there was no patron in the village. Assuming that everything that happens is just a trick, the sectarians using the spells are rapidly heading towards the village, in the hope of understanding everything. Do not come from where someone's leg flies in one of the leaders of the sect. She hits him a lot in the face. The man, losing balance, begins to rapidly fall to the ground. It was Shui. He was no less outraged that the leader of the sect was speaking at him. The man, emitting the last breath, continues to fall to the ground. The two sectarians who noticed a confidant, he decides to be pissed out to protect the sectarian. He does not doubt a drop in his actions, decide to punish the remaining sectarians. Applying a spell on himself with the speed of light rushed between all sectarians of which they were completely unable to see. The guy lands sharply to the ground with a strong roar to which the sectarians pay attention to. The sectarians were indignant that he attacked them secretly and fought dirty. He comes under the dome with a mockery. The guy explains that he attacked completely honestly and his opponents are too weak to notice him. One of the sectarians insults that he answers the slightly angry instantly. The sectarians also did not suit the way he put it, because he constantly insulted their elder. He confirms the words of one of the sectarians and explains that he deceived them. Because there was no barrier initially, he just imitated him. The guy also adds that he is actually a barrier. Another sectarian flies unnoticed for everyone, and he calls it inextricable for his weak spell. The rest of the sectarians were amazed that the elder Xin Liu arrived at the battlefield. He explains that he had no thoughts to stop the sectarians with his spell. With a grin, he completes his monologue that he did all this only in order to eliminate absolutely all sectarians. The sectarians were wary in the moment, because the guy looked at them resolutely and with a little contempt. But after a second, all at once they began to laugh loudly, as if they did not perceive the words seriously. For them the guy was only a weak student of the master and no more. In his thoughts, he gradually began to argue with himself, suspecting that the spell he had used in fact is very weak. The elder Liu, showing a finger, assures that it will not be difficult for him to dispel such a miserable spell, even during the drinking of tea. At this moment, a fireball gradually began to form in the hand of the elders, which he himself notes. The ball grew up every second to a form previously unknown to the guy. Elder Liu, who finished the spell, directed fire blades towards the village in order to end the battle once and for all. The fiery blades quickly flew towards the village, not wanting to stop at anything. The elders of the sect did not want to intervene in the Battle of Lu, and continued to silently observe what was happening. He also looked preparing for battle. A loud explosion sounded. A layer of dust rose, and for a second, the sectarians completely lost the village from the field of visibility. Slowly and quietly, dust gradually settled to the ground. In front of the sectarians, the same dome was set earlier before. The elder Liu could not believe what he saw, because he was sure that this was a lower-level spell. At that moment, he wiped sweat from his face, pretending that he was very difficult to repel all the attacks of a man. He again begins to mock an arrogant man, calling that old man. The man was angry and demanded that the guy leave the barrier and deal with him alone. He takes one of his objects and states that sectarians should not think that they are safe outside the barrier, because they were all in the zone of action of his spell. Without any explanation, he uses spells by releasing Fiery Phoenix. All sectarians were struck by such a powerful spell. The sectarians could not believe what they saw, because it was the divine beast Phoenix, which was lost many years earlier. He explains that this was a scarlet bird calling all sectarians villains. The bird was 10 times more than himself, and was behind him in anticipation of further instructions. One of the sectarians asks the elder Liu to pay attention to the form of Phoenix. The man notes that Phoenix is just an illusion, and no more. The elder Liu laughed out loudly from what he heard. The man notes that the guy is trying to fool them again. The elder Liu scatters his hands and begins to laugh hysterically. The man asks the guy to attack him with Phoenix. He a little alertly suggests that the elder went to the edge of the roof and he was crazy, but he does not want to refuse such a proposal that beneficial to him and agrees to attack the elder Phoenix, giving an order to the bird. Phoenix rushes sharply with a screech towards the elder of Liu. Waving his massive fire wings, he continued to quickly get closer to the elder Liu. The elder Liu prepared for a blow, adding that this is just an illusion and no more. Phoenix hurts the man with his wing and flies by. On the hands of the subordinate elders, Liu remains strong burns from which they begin to yell loudly. Everything around the elder of Li is enveloped in a bright red flame with people screaming from there. From the sectarians there are only small scraps falling from the sky. The sectarians were amazed, because just a second ago they saw the last time the elder Liu. The sectarians notice that gradually Phoenix is approaching their souls. The head of the section carries out the work of the dome on all people, stopping the flow of Phoenix fire. The head of the sect with only one hand continues to hold his protective dome. The man orders all sectarians to immediately retreat and report on the ongoing heavenly sect. He raises his relic as interested in why the sectarians decided to leave him, because he did not give permission to do so. 3 more creatures begin to fly over the city with great speed. Previously unknown creatures in the guise of a tiger, dragon, and turtles were rapidly heading towards the sectarians. The dragon sharply pierces the escaping sectarians with his blue tail. The remaining sectarians continued to work in fear of trying to survive from divine creatures. The tiger did not want to let go of the running sectarians and tried to catch up with them. The tiger already next to the remaining sectarians abruptly attacks those. The sectarians scattered who was where the battlefield, because they all wanted to live. The golden turtle, tired to the ground, crushes one of the sectarians. The sectarians in fear look at the golden turtle, not understanding what to do. The turtle immediately begins to blind sectarians, depicting them with its golden flame. At this moment, he is at a sufficient distance watching what is happening and laughs. He notices how an unknown creature is rapidly approaching in his direction. The creatures running from the battlefield, led by the head of the sect, are able to be a creature, the chapter requiring no lag behind her, because he tried to get out of the encirclement of divine creatures. At this moment, the sectarian notices a strange glow of the village that escaped from the dome. The guy decides to attack from above on the head of the sect. He calls the head of the section because he gave the floor that he could not move off during the battle. The head of the sect offends the guy and decides to repulse this. He accepts the battle and activates his spells. Without extra words, the head of the sect uses his best spell with words so that he goes to hell. A strong flash passes in a centimeter from his shoulder, but he manages to dodge. He was amazed that the sectarians were not as weak as it seemed to him. But the attacks did not stop there, and the head of the sect following sends several blades towards the guy. The deputy head is mocking a defenseless guy. He perceived the battle in Sirius also begins to fight with the deputy. They begin to run to each other with the desire to defeat the enemy. He directs all his strength into his fist for the final blow. With only one blow, he overcome the deputy, imprinted that head directly into the ground. The head of the sect does not stand aloof and also periodically attacks. He is slightly back to regroup. The head of the sect wants to defeat the guy once and for all. Behind the men, his other followers have already lined up. The head shows a finger at him, and with contempt demands that he finally accept his fate. In thought, he did not understand why the man is so self-confident, because literally half an hour ago, he incinerated one of the elders of his sect. He comes a brilliant thought. He decides to give sectarians and further attack the barrier, because this will save him from many problems in the future. The sectarians turn sharply and just start running away. Out, he abruptly leave the battlefield. He indignantly screams in the trail so that they return and begin to fight with dignity. The sectarians, amused that the guy, began to worry about the battle. A sharp flash occurs in the moment, and the sky is covered with red light. He, in turn, waves the head with his hand and asks him to be reborn in the next life with a kind person. In front of the faces of the sectarians, a huge eye opened a white glow gradually absorbs them entirely. The head of the sect himself was shocked by such a strong technique. The man was unable to even move with horror. In the moment, all the remaining sectarians moved to the desert. There was not a soul around the survivors. This spell was a curse. The men should have passed all 8 species of deserted lands. Exhausted men continued to move along the endless desert in mortal bodies. Everything that was happening was just an illusion, but quite real. In the end, being left alone, the head of the sect falls powerlessly in the middle of the desert. He did not have the strength to continue to look for a way out. At that moment, he stood above the bodies of the fallen sectarians and continued to receive a large number of points for them. He also notes that his animals finished cleaning the surroundings and returned to their initial positions. Each divine beast is sealed back in its flag previously established it. With a smile, he looks into the distance, realizing that he finally finished. The guy decides to return to the village and see how the inhabitants are doing at that moment. People in the village furiously discuss the divine animals seen. They were struck by their sizes and how they looked alive. One of the inhabitants notes that their master is returning back to the village. All the inhabitants slowly approach the guy, interested in Lee with the sectarians. At first, he stood quite gloomy. It seemed that something irreversible on the battlefield. But the guy immediately broke into a smile that the inhabitants of the village did not immediately understand. The inhabitants of the village were examined in bewilderment. Residents of the village, realizing that the young master managed to celebrate the victory loudly. Among the crowd stood Xiao in anticipation when a young master approaches her. Having stepped closer, he welcomes his girlfriend. The girl blushing the guy for salvation. Having finished and returning to his hut, he decides to get acquainted with new abilities and acquired knowledge from the battle. The guy actively examines the skill window, gradually acquainting with everything. He arranged such an outcome after the battle, because in addition to the experience and skills, the guy also received the golden core of the leader of the sectarians. The guy continues to think about the recent battle, about his problems. He understood that he was strong. He could not fight with both fists, because for him it was too low. With a grin, he assumes that in the future, he will certainly receive sparkling armor and weapons. At this moment, the system invites the guy to check the skills of the rank of heaven, which the guy immediately decides and do. Having familiarized himself with everything and their value, he understands that he wants to acquire everything at once. Having settled all his emotions, he decides to judge and choose more suitable skills for himself. He also comes to the conclusion that he will have to go a considerable way to become stronger and stronger. He got acquainted with 7 secret arts to understand what he should choose for a better battle. He begins to understand that there are too many secret arts, and it is difficult for him to choose the battle style suitable for his style. Not wanting to continue to waste time in empty, he decides to acquire all 7 secret arts, which immediately is inhibited by the system. The system also offers a guy to purchase a secret weapon for his new abilities, to what he agrees without any reasoning. He begins to grin, understanding how strong he became. The guy also asks the system to purchase other spells for the future application. He receives several ingots in his hand for his brand new weapon. Then the guy receives in his hands and weapons. The weapon was like a massive 2-handed sword. He puts on his brand new mantle and becomes in a rack with a brand new sword. He likes him how he looks, clarifying the system and what skills are now available to him with this mantle. The system dutifully tells everything about new clothes and weapons. After hearing, he begins to wave his sword like a new toy, continuing to admire those. In the moment, the guy stops ending his games. Having folded all his new things, the guy sits back on the bed and decides to plunge into the system again. Having finished dealing with the system, the guy decides to take a walk around the village. 2 elders passing by greeted the guy. He is interested in where they are directing to what he gets the answer, that they need to get to the neighboring village behind the seeds. They tell everything about the nearest village and where exactly she is. He asks men not to worry about the seeds and interview all the inhabitants of their wishes, after which he himself goes and will bring everything to the village. At that moment he runs to the side, turning to that. The girl overheard a conversation. He and men asks the guy to buy Tanya for her. The guy does not immediately understand why the girl needs fabric. Shio embarrassedly explains that the guy is not suitable for scraps of dirty clothes, and she wants to sew a new one for him. With a smile, he agrees with the girl to bring her the right amount of fabric. The girl is embarrassed and in a hurry leaves the guy. The elders standing behind laugh from the pretty Xiao. He also smiles in the trail of the girl, because he also worries about her. He understands that for such a long stay in this world, he never left this village, and he, in anticipation of a campaign in an unknown village, he moves to the city of Li Shui to purchase the necessary things. At that moment, Shi on the balcony ate a red apple and noticed how fussy the city was. Looking around the side, the guy notices a familiar girl. The guy realized that this is the very girl he saw when he appeared in this world. I do not want to contact a guy, covering his face with a hood. Several men accompanying the girl also notice an unknown guy, but does not show in any way. The girl radiates the power of the guy, but passers-by does not want to contact him. Walking along the road, to accompanying the girl in a note how the guy was strong, and they should be more careful. At this moment, he decides to hide behind the nearest wall. I note that he should continue to wear this mantle in order to receive additional glasses. He looks out from behind the wall. The guy watches how the girl leaves in an unknown direction. At this moment, a girl with her accompanying discusses recent events about what happened in a small settlement. He, not wanting to intervene in their conversation, continues to eavesdrop, ticking. He observes important moments for himself. The girl was interested in who the guy was protecting the innocent village. Without further ado, the man immediately reports that this is a student of the master Duan Jude. The girl turns, does not believe her ears, and asks him to confidently in his words. He, being nearby, does not understand why he is associated with an unknown man for him. Actions are transferred to the heavenly sect. 2 elders report their master and the problem in the village of Panshan. Men also believe that an unknown defender is connected with Duan Juda. Explains that they should not continue to fall into the village in the evening, because there will be consequences. The head of the sections did not want to agree with his advisor, calling his words nonsense. The head of the sect believes that they did not suffer losses for them, and this is a small problem, which in the future they will cope. When leaving, the head of the heavenly sect asks the sect Zhang to take care of the guy and solve this problem. The man approaches the edge of the balcony and looks into the distance. The head of the sect requires that tomorrow they would bring this guy to the heavenly sect. Inspecting the surroundings of the heavenly sect, the man notices that a guy can become a threat to them, which should be solved in the bud. The head of the heavenly sect offers the guy to make it just apologize and solve this problem. The head of the sect Luo Yang was struck by the decision of the man. He was not satisfied with the usual apology because he squeezed his teeth greatly. A man through his teeth could not afford Luo Yang to gain a foothold like a weak sect and allow himself to humiliate himself in the future. At that moment, An unknown figure declares that she does not agree with the decision of the head of the heavenly sect appears behind the men. The woman stops and looks at the head of the heavenly sect with a serious look. The man welcomes the elder song in parallel I am interested in for some reason that she does not agree with his decision. The woman explains that this is a slippery guy, and he should be eliminated immediately due to his lifestyle. The woman continued to tell various facts about the guy to bring everything to the fact that he should be immediately eliminated. One of the elders adds that for a student of Duan Judah, this is a normal practice, and for them it is a regular hobby. The woman insists on her innocence, explaining that the guy needs to be punished immediately for his misconduct. The head of the sect finishes this discussion by the fact that they will know everything tomorrow when the guy arrives in the heavenly sect. The head of Luo was still unhappy that he had to meet a guy without the opportunity to punish him. The woman preferred to remain silent, after which she left this hall. At that moment, he, having purchased all the things he needed, left the store saying goodbye to the merchant. The guy was pleased that he managed to purchase all the necessary things and also accumulate a large number of cruel actions. Going beyond the borders of the city, the guy applies his abilities and goes towards the village. On the way, he appears several people of the heavenly sect that the guy himself notes. Stopping, he landed right in front of people of the heavenly sect is interested in that they forgot on its territory. The elder located in the middle declares that a misunderstanding occurred between the village and the heavenly sect. With distrust, the guy looked at the representative of the heavenly sect, questioning what misunderstanding he talks about. The guy understands that the heavenly sect still thinks that he is a student of Judah, and therefore they sent a negotiator to him. The man, a little scared, asks the guy to come to the heavenly sect and solve this misunderstanding once and for all. Not although he agrees with the negotiator and silently leaves their dialogue, ascending to his abilities towards the village. On the way to the village, the guy thinks over the reason why they wanted to invite him to a heavenly sect. With a grin, the guy notes that he also knows how to get to the heavenly sect, and in particular, to their treasury. Having reached the village, the guy gives the necessary fabrics of xiao and other things to the inhabitants of the village. The girl thanks for the help examining the fabrics of xiao he brought, that he was taking care of her. The girl blushed a little, her compliments trying to justify herself. I understand the awkwardness of the situation. The guy puts his hand on the girl's head, calls that stupid. The guy says that on the way to the village, he was also invited to the heavenly sect to resolve the conflict. The girl is trying to dissuade the guy because heavenly sects is a large number of cultivators to you and it can be dangerous there. Xiao didn't even want to think that a guy might not return. He asks the girl to calm down because he is one of the strongest, and for him this is not a problem. With a smile, the guy also adds that as soon as he returns, he would like to try on new clothes as Sewn Girl. The girl agrees with the decision of the guy, let him go into the heavenly sect. The next day, Shui arrives in the heavenly sect. Wearing his mantle, the guy knocked several times into the room and then went inside. With a calm face, the guy slowly goes to the head of the heavenly sect. At that moment, the man sat on his golden throne around him by his other allies from various sects. Each of those present in this room pursued different goals, and this audience was supposed to resolve the conflict. The head of the heavenly sect, not wanting to smoke, immediately went to the matter and the recent conflict in the territory of the village of Shui. Shu was interested in how sects planned to resolve this conflict, because it was they who attacked his village. The woman interrupting the head of the heavenly sect immediately declares that the guy had before that robbed their treasury. Having dismissed Shui, pretends that he does not understand what treasury is talking about, adding that apparently they themselves lost their things and are looking for the guilty. Several chapters of sects were outraged by such an ignorance from the guy. Sue asks to stop screaming and still proceed to the facts and evidence that the prosecution should be present. One of the sectarians states that the guy is not very much for the accident, but he managed to identify him, paying attention to one of the subordinates who expressed his opinion. Shui understood that he could not defeat the absolutely all sectarians who attacked the village. Not wanting to excite, Shui publicly states that in measures of defense, he had to kill absolutely all the attackers of the sectarians. The head of the heavenly sect states that with this attitude, their negotiations will be completed, and they have nothing to talk about in the future. The guy not seeing in these negotiations any point, and he himself immediately goes to the exit. C, taking advantage of the case, finally adds that after that he will talk with his teacher and sectarians personally. The head of the heavenly sect was finally convinced that Shui is a student of Judah. The head of the sect Luo was also amazed at what he heard, because he did not fully believe in rumors. The woman, while behind the back, believed that the guy was just trying to manipulate them with Judah. The old man explains to the young cultivator that he did not correctly understand the head of the heavenly sect. Shui still decides to listen to the old man. He does not quite understand what the negotiations should have been led to, since the man was not initially set up for peace negotiations. The head of the heavenly sect, not wanting to continue to boot with a monotonous prelude, decides to go over to the essence of the meeting. The man demands that Shui apologize to each present for the incident. The man also adds that in their treasury there is a very rare object destroying any spell, and if he does not apologize, they will use it in the village. The man continues to threaten, reminding him of the defenselessness of the villagers. With a grin, Shui is interested in whether the leader of the heavenly sect is trying to threaten him. With a serious face, the head of the heavenly sect assures that this is just warnings and no more. He adds that in spite of everything, he cannot apologize. He invents the fables with his teacher, and the fact that it was he who ordered him to not apologize to anyone, otherwise the punishment will befall him. He still decides to offer a compromise to all sectarians and resolve this conflict, because he was not much interested in it. With a smile, he invites everyone to have dinner with him and talk heart to heart. Dinner took place. All sectarians from different sects feasted and celebrated the truce of sects and villages. The woman was not satisfied with this layout, so she calls the student for a new assignment. She asks the student to bring her the necessary things without further ado, after which the girl immediately leaves. The woman still continued to think about the plan of retaliation over an ignorant boy. He, supporting the crowd, offers cultivators to drink to the bottom for their health. In his soul, he mixed the whole situation, because all the cultivators indulged him because they thought that he was a student of Duan. Closer to the night, he goes out into the street, noting that now he has no more problems with the heavenly sect and their subordinates. The head of the heavenly sect comes after, and decides to add that he had previously met with the master of the guy. He pays attention to the man. The head of the heavenly sect is interested in how his teacher is doing. He, again inventing stories, states that his teacher continues to have fun on the eastern continents. The chapter was interested in this, because he himself understood the power of the guy. He also adds that his teacher handed him a secret spell, after which he immediately appears, inviting the leader Zhang to try it. The head of the heavenly sect with a smile refuses, explaining that their fate will sooner or later reduce. At this moment, Zhang looks at the ground. Zhang lastly also adds that no one will attack the village of Pansona more without his knowledge. He draws attention to a serious expression on the face of the head of the heavenly sect, and how they are all afraid of the power of Duan. He also recalls the treasury of the heavenly sect. He would still like to get there again. He says goodbye to Zhang, adding that he still needs to return to his village. Zhang agrees and releases the guy. Applying the spell, he flies in an unknown direction. He was glad with a smile that now the explosion of Pan Shang did not threaten the danger in the form of a heavenly sect. In the moment on the approach to the village, he sharply begins to feel the heaviness in his chest, suggesting that he could be poisoned. At that moment, a strong storm began near the village. The girl previously located in the city was already near the village. The girl notices that the village enveloped the flame. Everything was burning without signs of life. She with two other accompanying people decide to go down and help surviving residents. The girl, using magic, calmly lands on the square, shrouded in flame. Many residents were already lying without signs of life. All of them were cut and very wounded from a stitching object. Suddenly, for a girl, she notices how a thug with a saber attacks the next resident of the village from the back. Two thugs come closer, and with a malicious smile, they notice that the girl was dressed in the robes of the heavenly sect. The girl was shocked by this attitude of the bandits, because of which she took out her sword and directed towards the attackers. Unknowns immediately rushed, using their weapons towards the girl. The guy notices the village covered by a flame, which greatly amazes him. He could not believe what he saw because he imposed a barrier in advance to defend. He shouted that he could not believe it, not knowing what to do next. He wakes up after the shock, immediately rushes towards the village, because he was worried about the condition of Xiao Zhao. At that moment, from nowhere, he was attacked by another thug who wants to kill the guy. Without any effort, the guy cuts the thug, from which he immediately leaves the world. He notices the inhabitants lying on the road. The guy was in severe shock, because he personally knew all of them. All the inhabitants of the village were soullessly lying on the road. All of them killed the thugs who arrived in the village. After what he saw, he got into a stupor. The guy did not know what to do after everything he saw. At that moment, the voice of Xiao sounded from behind. The girl was actively calling for him to get to him. He turns his head and watches the frightened Xiao running to the meeting. At some point, Xiao felt safe and with a smile extended her hand to the guy. He was still drooping his face at that moment. He still could not move away from what he saw. He also holds out his hand to the girl, trying to catch her and save her from all chaos in the village. The girl almost ran to the guy, and in just 1 centimeter, her hand was from him. At some point, an unknown object flew through the girl's body, which is why Xiao sharply began to fall to the ground. The girl fell dead to the ground, and next to her the leg of the next cephaloresis appeared. An unknown man mocked at the loss. He also wanted to send the guy himself. Without unnecessary thought, in just 1 millisecond, the guy destroys the body of the Gloriorezer into the smallest pieces without leaving and a chance to save it. He immediately runs up to the girl, trying to take Xiao in his arms. Holding the body of Xiao, the guy tries to withdraw the girl. He was desperate to the edge that the girl ceased to show signs of life. The distraught, he immediately began to turn to the system for help. The whole cloak and his head were wet. The rain only increased. He begins to buy all possible medicines, spending absolutely all his glasses accumulated over the last battle. The girl puts his hand on his face and asks the guy to calm down, saying that everything will be fine with him. For a second, he forgot about his anger and silently listened to the girl. Xiao smiled at the guy, trying to console him. Despite this, the girl's wound was deadly, and she had no chance to survive. Xiao last adds that she really liked him more than just a gentleman. In front of his eyes, he began to boost tears. He was not able to restrain emotions. The guy seemed to froze. It was difficult for him to move. Xiao calls himself the happiest because of a meeting with him, after which tears poured down her cheeks. The girl is unable to fight for life, more slowly begins to fade away. Her hand releases the guy's face. Xiao is dead in an eternal dream. Her hand is soullessly falling to the ground. He continued to keep the girl, trying to come up with a plan to save the girl. He did not want to give up so easily. He was completely suppressed. In his head was only the silhouette of the kind and smiling Xiao. He quietly spoke her name. Tears continued to flow on its own, but this did not bother him. He pressed the girl closer and asked her forgiveness. The battle still continued in the village. Subordinates of the girls cut the next cephaloresis with one blow. One of the men notes that he heard strange sounds nearby. It seems to them that there were still survivors in the village. The girl and 2 men hurried to the survivors to help them. On the spot, he was sitting next to the girl's body. He was amazed at the meeting, because it was the same master that she had previously met in Li Shui. Ignoring new guests, the guy is quietly interested in the system, whether he can revive the girl in any way. The system, as always, monotonously explains all the variations and what the guy should strive for. He understands that he should continue to develop and improve the system. Having listened to the system to the end, he agrees to all conditions and decides to earn the perfect stage of the gold nucleus. He continues to look at the soulless body of Xiao with a crazy smile and extinguished eyes. The guy plans to use all offenders as an experience. He takes out the subject of the pagoda of the soul and decides to use it on the body of Xiao. Having read the spell, puts the girl's soul in an object in order to save her in the future. The system still decides to turn to the guy with the proposal to bury the girl's body and show respect for her. The girl begins to remember the guy and who he was at the first meeting. She was surprised that he became so strong in such a short time. He decides to turn to the girl with the question of whether they know who the attackers were. The girl was in a stupor and did not know what to do. Hatred was read on his face. The guy was decided to take revenge on his offenders and all involved. The girl felt strong pressure froze. It was difficult for her to answer his question. A nervous girl still decides to speak with him, having lowered his head and then lifting herself towards the guy. The girl calls the thugs of the sect of fallen souls. Without any words, Chui uses the ability and immediately directs towards the sect of fallen souls. At the entrance, he immediately eliminates a dozen students of the sect. At this moment, the head of the sect of fallen souls becomes a little concerned. The leader addresses him, not fully understanding why the guy just kills his disciples so easily. The leader of the sect of fallen souls continues to demand he to stop bloodshed. Having lowered his head, he claims that he will stop only when to completely destroy the sect of fallen souls. At this moment, a dozen more sectarians of fallen souls attack him from such self-confidence from nowhere. He easily straightens out with all one blow with absolutely everyone who wanted to harm him in such a dirty way. All sectarians are soullessly flying around the vicinity of the parade ground. The leader of the sect of the fallen souls was amazed at the power of an unknown guy. The leader orders all his students to retreat immediately, explaining that they have not a single chance. The leader of the sect immediately begins to use his strength, then calls on the black fiery dragon rising into heaven. He did not stop this drop. Taking his 2-handed sword, he rushes towards the leader of the sect. The fiery dragon sharply begins to fly to the ground aside he with the desire to absorb an arrogant guy. Without unnecessary emotions, he immediately calls the wave of absorption and directs towards the fiery dragon. After the attack, the guy immediately jumps towards the fiery dragon in order to finish off that. With just one blow, the flame of the dragon sharply begins to fade away, and the monster itself slowly began to disappear. Unable to control the fire of the dragon, the fireballs sharply began to fall throughout the surroundings of the sect of fallen souls. The sectarian who fell under the fire began to scream strongly and scatter in different directions, wanting to leave the battlefield as soon as possible. Only the leader of the sect of the fallen souls continued to fight with him and call on all new objects, trying to restrain the invincible guy with all his might. The leader of the sect trying to shut up in parallel. He declares that after the next attack, even Duan is not able to escape. After that, he launches an electric blade aside. He easily begins to dodge all falling blades. The blades during the fall began to explode, but not a single attack could even hurt. The guy continued to easily dodge all attacks. In the end, he understands that he should use the system and begin to reflect the blows back towards the leader of the sect. He uses secret art and stops all blades. All blades stop dead meter from him. Through the force, he continued to restrain hundreds of blades directed right in his direction. The leader of the sect could not believe what he saw, because the guy managed to restrain his crown equipment with an unknown technique. It began to shake slightly from such a complex technique. Having passed the whole pain, the guy manages to deploy the blades towards the leader of the sect and send it back. The leader could not recover, because his technique was invincible. The leader of the sect asked the guy to stop and discuss everything. The leader in fear claims that their sect made a slaughter by order. The leader, not wanting to continue the battle because he may die, claims that the order was given to the elder Song. He was amazed at such a turn. A step before his death, the head shouts that it was the old woman Sun Chui Li who ordered him and his students to attack the village. The leader froze in anticipation of the inevitable end. The whole face of the man was then covered with strong fear. One of the blades stopped right in front of his pupil. Why the man's eyes were covered with red veins. The leader decides to rub in confidence and explains his act by the fact that it was by order of the old woman who he had to do this. He continues to listen to the man, giving him small chances of salvation, unlike his students. The man adds that it was the old woman's artifact that helped dispel the spell around the village. He was furious from what he heard. The guy was about to take revenge on everyone involved in the murder of the inhabitants of the village. The leader continues to dissuade the guy to kill him, throwing his guilt on the heavenly sect. A malicious smile appeared on the man's face. The sectarian planned to regain control of the daggers, and he repulsed him. He simply lets the daggers towards the leader of the sect. Hundreds of daggers pierce the man through and through, one of which pierces through the head of the leader, without a chance of salvation. The man begins to scream loudly from pain a second before his death. He, in turn, holds a fist and with a serious face adds that he does not throw words into the wind and is obliged to eradicate the members of this sect with his own hands. He again raises hundreds of blades into the sky, directing them to the sides of the surviving sectarians. One by one, he begins to kill without leaving a single survivor in his path. The sectarians, in hellish pain, continue to fight for life and try to run away from the bloody bath. He, analyzing the further campaign in the heavenly sect, suggests that he is too weak and therefore decides to purchase the necessary objects. With the system, he also decides to open the mysterious gifts from which he immediately receives valuable objects. Around the guy a blue glow appears, and the system congratulates the guy on a new skill of flames of frozen bones. He takes this flame in his hands, realizing that it was this that he needed to destroy the sect. The system also observes the high cost of this spell of 1,300 points. With the face of the distraught, he decides to go to the heavenly sect and decide all times and for all. Also buys several artifacts for battle. He takes out the fabrics previously bought by Qiao for clothes and decides to apply a spell on them. He picks up the fallen sectarians with the help of fabrics and takes them with him. All earlier, where Shui woke up, ascended by many dead villagers. He stops near the grave of Xiao and finally decides to say goodbye to the girl. The initials of the girl were written on the grave. The tombstone did not differ from the rest. Shui decides to dissolve his hair for an additional effect of seriousness. Shui leaves the white ribbon received from Xiao on her grave. Leaving his hair, the guy slowly heads towards the heavenly sect. Shui with a grin asks Xiao to trust him, because now he was going to deal with the sect once and for all. In the hands of the guy were the very blue fabrics that previously belonged to the Zhao. He rises into the sky and adds that now the line of the heavenly sect has come. The guy's eyes were filled with anger, and he was unshakable in his decisions. Actions are transferred to the square of the heavenly sect. The students of the heavenly sect notice a strange glow of a rapidly approaching them. He was in the sky and demanded that Song and Jiang go out to him. The masters of the heavenly sect were struck by such impudence from the boy. Without unnecessary preludes, he weakens the grip and releases all the dead sectarians to the square of the heavenly sect. The students of the heavenly sect, from fright, sharply revealed the swords in bewilderment. Who was such an arrogant boy? One after another, sectarians continued to fall on the square, covering the entire space with corpses. The area was gradually stained in red tones due to the abundance of blood of dead sectarians. At that moment, he gradually began to receive points for all his actions, which he had little worried at the moment. With an indifferent and tired face, he demands that Jang and Song go to his square, because otherwise he planned to completely destroy the heavenly sect. Several students who were still in the square became in the rack in order to repulse the unknown guy. He begins to enrage that no one came to him, because the guy wanted justice. He invites students to atone for the sins of their teachers and mentors. At that moment, the issue was resolved in the hall. The chapter was interested in that the elder Song had already managed to make Mr. Su. The head of the sect claims that he promised to defend the sect Panshan. The old woman, not understanding what the problem, continues to insist that there is nothing in the murder of the villagers. The chapter dismisses with his hand, realizing that the old woman had done things. At this moment, Shui demands that Zhang and Song go to his square. A minute later, a warning followed with a further threat of Shui with the destruction of a completely heavenly sect. The head of the heavenly sect understands that the guy came with serious intentions and looks down on him. At that moment, one of the students of the heavenly sect runs into the hall with a statement that Shu had already killed several elite students of the senior hall. The old woman asks the head to give her the opportunity to deal with an ignorant guy once and for all. The head gets up from the throne and explains that the old woman cannot just take and kill the guy. The old woman, with an embittered face, states that they cannot forgive the guy to kill the students of the heavenly sect. The head demands that the old woman immediately shut up and listen to his orders. The head of the heavenly sect recalls that the guy is a student of Duan, and he can at any moment calling his teacher and destroy the entire fiery nation. In their thoughts, everyone understood that they were now faced with a serious problem that requires an urgent solution. The old woman, squeezing his teeth, considers the next step. To solve this problem, the old woman, through sweat, still decides to go out and answer for his actions before the guy. Destroyed, a dozen more students of the heavenly sect continued to stand unshakably in the square in anticipation of Song and Zhang. The head of the sect, including his other subordinates, goes to the square and notices the lying leader of the fallen souls and his people. He adds through the grin that he is glad to see all the people he needs. He states that the head of the heavenly sect will understand everything only after he is able to deal with the old woman. The surviving students say that the guy is too strong and, without unnecessary hesitation, killed the elder for accused him of everything that happened. One of the students points a finger at the guy, calling him a monster, which should be eliminated immediately. All students agree with the words of the student and decide to punish him together for his actions. He laughed the phrase that the heavenly sect did nothing, calling him a monster. He shouted the accusations towards the old woman and the fact that she destroyed his village. He begins to insult a woman, publicly accusing her of all her deeds. Pupils and elders were amazed at what they heard, because they first recognized such information about their sect. The head of the sect decides to contact a guy with an apology. The old woman at that moment extends an expensive potion to the guy as an apology. The old woman begins to apologize, in the moment, having agreed by calling the inhabitants of insects. He silently takes the potion in his hand. The old woman continues to apologize, hoping that this will make amends her guilt before the guy. He throws the potion with all his vigor on the floor, breaking that. He continues to actively trample the remains of the potion without evaluating the positive gesture of the old woman. He wants to take revenge on his friends and the girl killing the old woman. He slowly begins to go towards the old woman to realize a plan of revenge. The head of the sect decides to ask what the guy wants to do with a woman. He tightly takes the sword in his hand, using the acceleration spell. He sharply begins to run towards the old woman in order to take revenge on all the inhabitants with blood. The old woman, understanding that she has no other output, becomes in the rack, preparing to repel the attack. The guy continues to actively reduce distances to his goal. He, through his teeth, analyzes his entire plan. The guy planned to inflict several strokes to injure the old woman, and then burn with an icy bonfire. In the moment at the battlefield, a big explosion takes place, destroying everything that was nearby. He does not have time to dodge such a strong attack, because of which he flies back with his sword. He falls on the square without strength, because right across his body, there was a blow without any blocking. He kneels, abandoning his own blood, departing from the last blow and taking a breath. He again becomes in the rack for another counter, offensive. The leader of the heavenly sect asks the guy to calm down and stop in order to prevent even greater victims. He overturned his head, mocking a man. He was not much interested in this, because the main goal of the guy was revenge and the murder of an old woman. A woman shouts about the recklessness of a guy who is ready to put on the end of tens of other lives. He, putting one hand to his chest, states that Christians killed by the old woman were more than just people for him, and he planned to take revenge for them. The students of the heavenly sect were struck by this outcome. Many those present no longer understood on which side they were. All those present gradually begin to believe the words, because of which the guy begins to accumulate points of deception. The leader of the heavenly sect states that he will not attack the guy due to the fact that he is a student of the famous master. At this moment, he begins to accumulate blue energy in his palm. The guy was not going to stop there. The elders of the sect were struck by what they saw, because this technique was not previously presented anywhere. He defiantly raises the ball of icy fire with his hand up. The energy of the guy in his hand gradually began to transform into something else. The color of the ball was slowly covered with a greenish tint, which gave it a greater effect of intimidation. The leader of the heavenly sect himself was amazed at this technique, because for such a large amount of time he also saw something like that for the first time. The leader begins to notice, looking around the guy, that he managed to collect a large number of fantastic objects. The leader of the heavenly sect adds that he needs to get rid of the objects of the guy in his hands. He continues to unite his forces in his hands. The blue glow continued to increase, absorbing everything around. After activating its ability, a strong flash occurred. The earth shuddered at that moment. A moment later, the strongest explosion sounded, and nothing remained of the square. The leader of the sect, not having time to react, was still amazed at the power of this technique. He again continued to accumulate his energy in his hands and direct towards the old woman. He shouted loudly that he wanted to unite two techniques together, because of which the glow again absorbs all the warfa. A second explosion sounded with even greater power. All students and masters could not even move from such powerful technology. The head of the heavenly sectary asks the guy to calm down and end the whole performance, noting that everyone will die. He was little interested, and he continued to develop his technique. A strange crack was sounded at the guy's feet. With the help of his energy, he begins to defiantly do something like a lotus. He holds out a bluish shade in front of him. In the end, he adds that he will have enough as a victim the life of the old woman by letting Lily towards the masters. The masters of the inclusive and the leader of the heavenly sect are silently watching as the lotus heads in their direction. He shouts a cancer phrase to activate an explosive lotus and destroy everything surrounded by it. The lotus begins to more and more ignorantly dispelling white light in the area of the heavenly sect. White light gradually dragged on the non-existence of all sectarians nearby. A strong explosion sounded in the moment, and everything in the district was enveloped in a bright flame. The head of the sect understands that he will not be able to save the elders for whom this lotus was intended. The old woman at the last moment manages to cover his face with his own hands. The woman was more and more enveloped in the white light, absorbing her completely. At the last moment, the old woman only manages to squeak from severe pain. White light instantly absorbs the old woman without leaving no chance of salvation. The man uses the spell at the same moment as everything takes off into the air. A man jumps into the thick of the whole explosion in an attempt to overcome all destruction. The entire settlement of the heavenly sect was destroyed. All buildings located in the district were shrouded in the strongest flame and destruction. In the place where the lot was a deep hole from which the flames of flames were emerging mixed with smoke. The students of the heavenly sect were scattered throughout the area of the heavenly sect without signs of life. All people who were at the time of the explosion were dead, which he rejoiced. He, in turn, returns to the dilapidated heavenly sect and observes the entire chaos located there. He continues to receive an endless number of points for the system with incredible speed. With a mental laugh, the guy begins to scream while in ruins. With an even greater laugh, he begins to scream with joy, because the guy managed to take revenge on his offenders. He raised his head, claims that he was able to avenge his loved ones. The buildings continued to actively collapse one after another. He asked for forgiveness from his inhabitants for what was happening. A severe pain was visible on the guy's face, which could not be cured by anything, even revenge. In his thoughts, he rushed about the images of village inhabitants who smiled sweetly at the guy. Sho also slowly approached the guy and smiled at his exploits. He understands that he should finish this stage and follow further. Having finished mourn the inhabitants and what is happening as a whole, he is heading to the side of wanting to leave this place. Somewhere nearby, he sounded a strong explosion, which attracted the attention of the guy. The head of the heavenly sect slowly comes out of a thick clump of dust. A man with anger in the face begins to call. The man, not wanting to endure the guy's exit morally, abruptly attacks him. He silently watches how quickly the head of the sect approached him. In the end, he grinned at that in response. He uses the seal of teleportation, notes that the head of the sect had to foresee this outcome of events. During teleportation, he also adds that the chapter is afraid of his master. But the guy was of little interest to the guy, because he relies only on himself. The head of the heavenly sect states that he will kill the guy at the next meeting. He also adds in response that he will kill the man first. He is teleporting in the moment, flying away in an unknown direction. The blow of the head of the heavenly sect comes along the wall without hitting the guy. The earth shudders, covered with a large number of cracks. A man could not forgive himself for such an outcome, because the heavenly sect did not tolerate such a terrible collapse over the past 5,000 years. Shouting and angry at everything around the man adds that this did not happen even in tens of thousands of years. During the battle with the guy, the heavenly sect suffered losses from several elders and a large number of students. The building effects were very destroyed and the fire glowed everywhere. He immediately left the place of the battle. The head of the heavenly sect nearly went crazy and vowed to take revenge on the guy. After all the events, a month and a half passed and the action is transferred to the mountains saturated with rich forests. The wounded girl continues to run away. Girls almost caught up with uninvited evil spirits begin to threaten the snake in imminent death. The girl approached closer to the monster begins to blame her to kill her sister while she was collecting medicinal herbs. The snake, prepared for the battle, decides to express his opinion that for him people are just prey. The snake continues to mock girls, calling a girl, a very tasty girl. I do not want to continue to listen to the monster entering the battle with him. Girls easily begin to pierce the snake with their sharp blades. I turn on the flesh and the head of the snake slowly broke up into small pieces. The girl watched a deceased snake for several seconds in anticipation that she could attack. At this moment, an unknown man begins to clap the girl's feet to call their work wonderful. Girls are interested in who the people data were and what they wanted from them. A man thanked the girls for the courage and asks to give him this snake. With his hands in front of him, a serious face, a man demands that you be given all his magic objects and roll away from his eyes. The girls still could not understand who exactly tried to rob them, because earlier they did not meet these people. The man frowned at the defenseless girls, because there were several times more people. Reluctantly, the girls agree to give their weapons and artifacts for their salvation. Girls throw everything to the floor without further ado and head in the opposite direction from the sect of the Bloody Sea. With an evil grin, the man adds that he demanded from the girls to roll, but does not leave. The girls stop at a perplexity and begin to argue with the spoiled sectarians. The man believed that he himself is free to decide the fate of an ordinary person. Sticking his head and continuing to behave like a spoiled child, the sectarian declares that in a good mood, he planned to save the girl's life. The girls prepared for the worst, because the man decides to add that after they decided to insult him, he changed his mind to leave the girls alive. An unknown man said that at the moment, they are robbed themselves. The guard draws attention to him standing with his two-handed sword nearby. He picking up in his ear and with a calm face demands that the sectarians hurry to give all their values to him. The girls were amazed that such an inconspicuous guy decided to stand up for them. The security and the head of the sectarians were at a loss from such impudence, because their number surpassed a miserable guy with a sword. One of the girls is still amazed at the courage of the guy, begins to assume that the guy is disturbed and simply looking for his fate. One of the sectarians states that he behaves unprofessional, and this forest was their territory for robberies. The sectarians began to mock the absurdity of the guy. Without any effort, he attracts several swords of sectarians to his hand. He sticks all the swords in front of him, showing his superiority. Without any fear, the guy mocks at the sectarians, hinting that he will not be greeted if they decide to attack him. The men were amazed that the guy had artifacts for such magic and began to repulse the arrogant guy. One of the senior sectarians accepts the challenge and also mocks at the helplessness of the guy, because for him, this magic is unremarkable. He, pointing a finger at the sectarians, demands to think about all the consequences, because he was alone and came to them voluntarily. The head of the group of sectarians gives the order to deal with him immediately and feed his corpse to the dogs after. The man was still sure that the guy was a weak cultivator. Without extra words, the whole guard sharply begins to step towards the lonely standing hay. He understands that he will have to accept this battle and deal with all sectarians. He uses his two-handed sword to defeat all sectarians with one blow. Without any effort, he cuts all the attackers without leaving them and a chance to repulse in the future. The head of the group was amazed that the guy managed to defeat all his elite warriors with only one blow. He begins to mock the helplessness of a man and how quickly he became as lonely as himself. He was assigned a sword to the throat of a man. The sectarian did not understand why the guy found himself so on the sect of the Bloody Sea, and why they bought him so much. Without any extra emotion, he immediately explains that he was not interested in the sect of the Bloody Sea, because he came to rob the sectarians. The sectarian was angry and confused from his position, because he was not so humiliated so. The girl watching heroism, he chuckled slightly at what was happening. Suddenly, the girl felt that the strength around the guy had increased sharply, and he no longer seemed an ordinary cultivator. The girl understands that this was planned by a guy, and he specifically hides his strength in front of other people. The girl comes closer and turns to him with a request to leave without unnecessary problems. He flatly refuses, because he was not afraid of the greatness of the sect of the Bloody Sea. The girls were at a loss from the guy's actions. He, coughing up and trying to make a pathos expression on his face, asks the girls to stay and continue to observe their confrontation. The girls could not understand what the guy was achieving, suggests that he lost his mind. The sectarian, lowering his head, claims that earlier their sect has never humiliated other people. On the face of the man, the veins began to speak with anger. The man could not allow him to further humiliate him. He, without reacting to the insults of the guy, picks in his ear. The guy does not believe that the man is as formidable as he talks about it. He thoughts in his thoughts that the murder of people brings him much more points than demonic animals, and this suited him more. The man demands that he stay in this place and expect his death. A man, without waiting for permission from, he begins to head into the depths of the forest. At this moment, one of the wounded sectarians begins to cough after a deadly blow. He, realizing that another surviving sectarian appeared, calling the man to take his subordinate. The man silently stops waiting for the next move. He understands that the man decides to join him in the battle, accepting the challenge. Souza approaches a man with his two-handed sword. The man turns sharply, becoming in the rack. The man is interested in what the guy decided to do with him and whether he plans to fight. Having lowered his head, he only adds that he is trying to think about everything. Under the feet of the guy, his energy continued to spark. He stated that it was better to kill the future leader and attract more attention to himself. The man was amazed that the guy was really going to kill him. Girls with fear on her face, he calls a madman, because this was the future leader of the great sect. The girl holding out his hand to, he asks him to calm down and not kill the arrogant man. He, with a grin, continues to look down on a miserable man. The man, without enduring, accepts the battle, and still decides to teach the guy for his arrogance. He mocks at the man, because he knew the outcome of the battle in front of So Hao exceeded many times by strength. Without any resistance, he cuts a man in half without leaving a chance to life. The sectarian, still trying to get up, was amazed that he so easily killed the future leader of the Blood Sea sect. For the murder of the leader, he receives additional glasses and slowly begins to return to the surviving sectarian. He comes closer and helps the sectarian get up. The guy's plan was simple. He asks the sectarian to go to the sect and bring the leader to the same place. He allows him to go to his sect. In the end, he kindly waves his hand, asking him to report the incident as soon as possible. The sectarian silently goes into the thick of the forest, allegedly in his sect of the Bloody Sea. The girl in the edge was struck by the recklessness of the guy, because he easily let their enemy go. He comes closer and is interested in the girl, whether there are cultivators in the sect at the stage of emergence, to which he receives a negative answer. He assures the girls with a smile that it makes no sense to worry about it, because he is several times superior to all in strength. He immediately asks the girls to collect firewood so that he can cook food he caught. In a short time, the girls collected the right amount of wood for the fire. In a short time, he made an impromptu fire and caught a lot of food for 3. All the food looked quite appetizing. The SBE, with a smile, asks the girls to wait until he cooks everything at a fire for a greater taste. The girls were struck by the fact that Sui did not react to the approach of danger, because the sect of the Blood Sea had already advanced to them. He uses his strength to set fire to the tree so that the fire breaks out. The girls could not understand what the guy was trying to cook at the moment. He holds out a girl one piece of meat. She be confusedly picking up meat, noting hospitality and kindness to them. The girl seemed to be reborn again. He immediately notices how much the girl appreciated the taste of meat. At this moment, an inconspicuous cave was near the outban of the forest, inside which the old man lay. A man sleeps carefree in his den. 2 submissive Bengal tiger was sitting next to the man, waiting for their owner to wake up. Both tigers were red tigers of flame of the original stage of origin. The man awakened sharply. He was worried that over the past 100 years he did not want to eat, and it was today that he had been played by his appetite. Tigers began to shake slightly, thinking that their master was saying about them. He smelled precisely the cooked smell of meat, and this did not apply to his pets. The tiger states that half a month ago they were able to find a guy in the region of the Heavenly Sect named Shui Zui. The tiger also adds about all the nuances of the relationship of the guy and the Heavenly Sect, as well as the fact that he was covered with the name of the Duan. The man slowly left his cave, accompanied by tigers, who continued to inform the owner with recent events. He continues to sniff to a strange smell, heading after him. The old man was approaching closer and closer, that he became more and more fragrant. At this moment, he continued to prepare additional portions of meat for himself. He notices an unknown figure near their camp. The man runs up closer, then notifying how tasty the guy's food was prepared. The man asks to invite him to join the meal. He is at a loss, interested in girls, whether they know this old man. He suspects that the man is trying to deceive his food. The man sharply began to laugh, noticing how tasty this food was prepared. He also starts to laugh by calling old Gurman. He is interested in where the poor man can understand such a skillful food. The old man claims that he is not a poor and rather magnificent man. Everyone in thought still noticed that it was still an old beggar man in everything. Having finished, the man still praises cooking, but also adds that he is the second in the world, noting that no one in the world dares to be called first, that he has never heard of this and it does not make sense. He adds with a mockery that a man does not know this, because he is ignorant. He and the old man began the battle of views, because they were both quite stubborn people. The man, not wanting to continue the children's dispute, dismisses the guy with a statement that he was bored with arguing. With arrogance, he adds that he himself tasted many delicacies during his life. The old man mocks the guy, not believing that he could not get out of the lands of the people of fire to another territory. The man shows a finger at the girls, from which they shuddered. The old man is interested in whether they know the exquisite dish that was now discussed. The girls looked around in bewilderment and replied briefly that they did not know about this. He continues to call the old man to be ignorant, that he also wrote a great poem during meals. The man asks the guy to read his poem, continuing not to believe that such a young he could come up with something like that. He, with a serious face, lowering his head down, preparing to answer the man. With a grin, he slowly lifts his face and begins to read his poem about Ruhu with an expression. The man was amazed from what he heard, because a small number of people knew that Ruhu was originally fish. He continues to tell everything he knew about the dish of Ruhu and his components. He's squeezing his fist and showing his emotions of the real gourmet notes, the charm of this dish, and how important it is in his life. Girls could not resist such conflicting lines. The girls looked around that this poem could hardly be called anything, because in it there were only a few lines sounded normally. The man continued to carefully listen to the guy without giving any or emotion. In the moment, his face broke into a smile, because he heard the golden words in the poem. The man takes him by the arm and begins to praise him for his wonderful poem. He thanks for the sincerity of the old man and how he appreciated his work. The man is interested whether he had already managed to taste the rough of his life. He put his hand on his chest, declares that he was boasted and actually ate a rough. The old man was not clear what was the snow beer and where to get it. He puts his hand on the old man's shoulder and claims that after preparing such an ancient beer variety, he will definitely invite a man to taste him together. The old man begins to laugh loudly and calls the guy his new friend. The old man decides to give a small item as a strong friendship. The old man takes out a small black amulet from the sleeve and holds it out. He takes the amulet by noticing how well he was made. Having hooked the amulet to his belt, he thanks for the old man's gift. The old man watches how the guy hangs the amulet on his belt, which suited him. The girls did not understand why he and the old man no longer began to spill water after all the controversy. At that moment, numerous steps began to approach towards the camp. The girl reports that people from the Blood Sea sect are approaching them. With a smile, he calls on his two-handed sword, starting to expect when they arrive at them. The old man decides to contact a guy with the opportunity to help him deal with ill-wishers. He, with a grin and a self-confident face, states that the old man can only dream of it. He uses the ability to recognize the old man to check his level of skills. Around the old man there was only emptiness, which slightly interested the guy. He, with a worry in his thoughts, notes that he first failed to recognize the stage of human development. The man also analyzes him and noting that he is at the stage of the golden nuclear, and he will not cope with the approaching cultivators at the initial stage of the origin. Near the forest, an unknown object flew at the speed of sound. A previously unknown person appears in front of the group. Several cultivators stood in front of him. All of them were at the initial stage of origin. Girls immediately welcome the leader of the sect, accompanied by several elders. He stands aside as the girl's beauty, suggesting that in fact it could be an old woman who could keep youth. The leader of the sect is immediately interested in the students, what happened and under what circumstances the future leader of the Bloody Sea sect was to kill. The girls looked around silently among themselves. Girls decide to completely tell what happened in all the smallest details. The leader of the sect was struck by the calmness of the guy in a black mantle, because he tried to lure the rest of the Bloody Sea. All sectarians silently squinted at the guy, suggesting that he was bad thoughts in relation to the girls. He does not understand what is happening and why everyone is mowing at him. The old man, like others, looked at the boy askance. Nearby, another unknown sound appeared in the forest, which he immediately notices, and the leader of the sect of Great Changes. An unknown man, without trying to hide, continued to approach the crowd. Strange words calling their son rang out from the forest. Going out of the light of an old man with an embittered expression on his face demanded to confess to the unknown person who killed his son. The leader of the sect of Great Changes welcomes the leader of the Blood Sea sect. The man begins to scream and continue to demand that the unknown killer comes to him immediately. The elders are interested in the leader of the Great Changes what they should do next. The leader of the sect, preparing for the battle, gives the elders to prepare and protect because he helped their students. Men implicitly agree with the decision of the leader. Behind the leader of the Bloody Sea, several more subordinates appear. He continues to silently observe what is happening. The old man squinted at the guy in anticipation of that decision. The old man gradually approached closer and closer. He squinted at the expression on his face. The guy gradually began to confuse and nervous. He is recent to the old man, and sorry to stop looking at him like that. The old man does not understand why he still did not accept his help. Because among him there were too many people stronger than the guy. The old man, trying to rise in the guy's eyes, adds that his chance has left, and now even if he begs, he will not help. He shows with bewilderment a finger at the crowd, calling them a bunch of weaknesses to nothing, which are not represented for him. The old man indignantly pokes his finger in the face of the guy and declares that he will be the first to kill a self-confident guy when he is on the verge of death. He tries to remove the old man's hand, adding that if a man manages to kill him, he will take his last name. He and the old man began to argue again and quarrel among themselves to bring almost to a fight. The leader of the sect of Great Changes unfold towards the arguing old man, and he and the old man shouted at each other, almost spitting on each other. She wanted to kill the opponent. The leader could not understand what was happening and why an unknown guy screamed so loudly at the old man. The leader of the Blood Sea demands that he and the old man immediately shut up. Without any explanation, the leader of the Bloody Sea directs the spell towards the arguing he and the old man. The leader of Great Changes does not have time to repel the attack. The embittered leader of the Bloody Sea continued to use spells for a second attack. The old man and he did not move it, and they continued to argue. At that moment, from behind the blood, the leader of the Bloody Sea jumped, steamed. The leader of Great Changes requires the elders to immediately help the guy. He manages to pay attention, like the old man turning his head towards the leader of the Bloody Sea. The couple simultaneously requires dumping the annoying leader of the Bloody Sea by applying the spell. He and the old man send one spell to the leader of the leader. The leader understands that he is not able to dodge the directed attack, he and the old man. The leader, with incredible power, flies away. The leader of the Bloody Sea breaks one tree after another, unable to block such a strong technique. The leader of the Bloody Sea is not able to withstand such a serious blow. In the old man's eyes, everything rushed as if in a millisecond. Stopping a few meters from him, the leader of the sect is interested in what has happened to him at the moment. A small blue flame appears on the man's leg. The flame slowly spread throughout the body of a man, from which he began to scream. The flame with incredible speed sharply began to absorb the old man from head to toe. In the end, the man began to gradually freeze without a chance to get out. Only a small bluish crystal lying carelessly in the forest remained from the leader of the Bloody Sea. The rest of the elders of the Bloody Sea continued to watch how their leader disappeared into their eyes. The student of Great Changes suggested that it was the old man who managed to apply such a strange spell. At this moment, the system announces that he managed to defeat the leader and get a large number of experience points. The old man looked suspiciously at the guy, realizing that it was in fact that he had used such a strange and not previously seen spell. The old man decides to ask the guy how he managed to apply a well-known technique. He with a mockery declares that he can teach an ignorant old man if he asks. The old man refuses such a spell. The man slowly begins to go aside, saying goodbye to the ignorant he. He claims that he no longer wants to see the old man and does not expect a further meeting with him. The old man disappears in the moment without leaving, and a chance to see in which direction he moved. He was alert that the man was able to leave so quickly ahead of even divine escape spells. Everyone was amazed that the guy simply drove off the old man who saved them all a second ago. People silently continued to look at him carelessly standing. The guy turned around and also looked inquiringly at the crowd. The sect of the Bloody Fog, having lost the leader, did not despair and laughed loudly. All sectarians exposed the blades and were ready to immediately attack the self-confident he. He, picking in his ear, observes that he is glad that the old man had left and stopped interfering with opponents. The sectarians combine common efforts and declare that their hands are untied without a leader. All sectarians come to a common decision to defeat him and re-elect a new leader. The Bloody Sectarians add that they are ready to eliminate the Sect of Great Changes in addition, which struck the leader and elders of the Sect of Great Changes. The Elder of Great Changes calls sectarians shameless in relation to their leader. The sectarians continue to insult the leader of the Great Changes with the desire to abuse the girl. He prepared for the battle and with a serious face adds that the sectarians will be left for life. The sectarians were annoyed by a self-confident guy, and taking their blades, they sharply attacked him. Having activated his crown cold fire, it becomes in the rack, waiting for the sectarians to come at a closer distance. He uses an ice spell on sectarians, hitting one after another. The hand of one of the sectarians touches the ice. The sectarian's face turned pale with severe pain. A strong explosion takes place in the moment, and the icy fire completely absorbs self-confident and frivolous sectarians. The sectarians are not able to withstand due to their weak abilities continue to try to resist. One by one, they completely impress the icy fire. All sectarians are quickly covered with ice without a single chance. Only their hands stretching to the light were visible through piles of ice. After the end of the battle, only a few ice shops remain on the field without signs of life. The leader of the Great Changes, including the elders, were struck by such a turn. Under his feet he remained small fragments of Luda. The entire surface where the battle took place was covered with a layer of ice. The leader of the Great Changes could not believe the eyes. She was only interested in one question, who this guy was. He grinned in response. After all, another sect became interested in his person. It seems to be a real name with greatness. All those present were aware of recent events, and they knew that it was he who defeated the old woman's song with just one blow. He continued to smile amiably without representing the great changes in the threat for the sect. In the forest, there were still a few ice-likes without signs of life. The Eider of the sect of Great Changes looked around that everything that happened was exactly as described in the legend. He kindly comes closer and decides to offer the girl his help after the battle. The girl tries to refuse that she did nothing for this. He continues to insist that he is a good doctor and understands serious injuries. A student of the sect of Great Changes marks that he had previously proclaimed himself a great culinary specialist. He immediately stops the girl, explaining that this is just his hobby. The leader of the Great Changes is still perplexed by watching what is happening. He comes closer and begins to inspect the girl's body, suspecting that she can still be injured. The leader of the sect continues to insist that she does not need help, and she is in perfect order. He quarreled, decides to say that he cannot be mistaken, and explains his suspicions. He, mocking the gullible leaders of Great Changes, begins to tell some obscurity. The girl trustingly, and not suspecting any intent, listening to everything said. In the moment, the girl begins to understand what the guy was talking about at the moment. With a huge speed, the leader of Great Changes flies away from calling the guy a pervert. The elders did not have time to come to their senses as the leader of the Great Changes had already left them. He only manages to look after the flying girl. One of the elders was very amazed at the guy's ignorance, because a second ago everyone praised him and called a great man. The second elder in his thoughts noticed absolutely the same thing. He was also amazed at ignorance, but still thought to invite the guy to visit their sect. The elders thank them again for the salvation of their students, and invite Shui to visit their sect. Having stepped up, the elders planned to gently thank the guy who agreed to thank the guy on the arrival. Shui was not against visiting the nearest city and sect as a whole, because he was only in the forest for the last 6 months. Elders and students accompany him to their sect of a nearby city. They assure the guy that their sect was previously numerous and was at the same level with the heavenly sect when she was in his prime. The man adds that their sect began to decline at that moment. The founder left them forever. At that moment, Sui was looking for the elders around the sides. Men also noticed the greatness of their current leader, because in just 20 years she managed to reach the initial stage and take the post of leader. The man completes his monologue in that the parents of the current leader died in the great battle several years ago, and the whole sect was supported by SU. Men complain about the complexity of sects and difficult stability lately. Sue decides to stop and inspect more and more attentive. The guy notes that many buildings have been abandoned for years. Zhu was amazed that the sect was so small, because there were only 20 students, of which only 2 reached the stage of the golden nucleus. He decides to finish this and turn to the elders. Men silently listen to the offer of a young man. Shui asks him to represent him before the rest of the name Xiaoyan. Looking around, men did not understand why the whole conspiracy of the young man. Not seeing in this request a catch, men agree with a request of Yue. Saying goodbye to the elders of Zhui, it goes into the house to relax. The bed was soft enough, which immediately appreciated Shui. Placing the guy at the same moment plunged into a little sleep. Closer to the night, the guy's stomach made himself felt. The stomach rumbled with such force that the guy had to be distracted from his affairs. He began to analyze what he should do to quench hunger. In the moment, he felt a strange smell nearby. He got out of bed and went to the only window of his room. At the entrance stood the leader of the sect of Great Changes. He did not understand why the girl decided to come to him at such a late hour. He jokingly decides to ask why the girl did not sleep. In his thoughts, the guy was not clear why the girl came. The girl suggests that he is making fun of her, because she does not need a dream in such a serious stage of development of skills. He completely forgot that cultivators could relax while in meditations. He smiled back and invited the girl to go to drink tea with him. The girl politely refuses and offers to discuss everything right on his porch. He understands that the girl cannot just go into the bedroom late at night. He still did not understand why the girl came exactly at night and did not wait for the next day. She is on the porch of the house. He turns towards the square. The girl is accidentally interested in what the guy plans to do in the near future. He begins to understand why he was invited to a sect and brought him up at a time. With a smile, he decides to make sure of his guesses. Interested in whether the leader of the sect of great changes wants to invite him to a sect. She nods approvingly, confirming the guess, because she wanted to make the guy the elder of her sect. The girl looks at the guy in anticipation of a positive answer to her offer. He talks about his lonely, carefree future with a smile on his face. He looks at an empty parade ground in his thoughts, noting that he did not forget about the resurrection of his beloved Xiao. The girl continues to ask questions. She was interested in whether the guy was planning to settle down and join them. She begins to list the advantages of this proposal and the ease of all necessary actions. The girl is still at the window in anticipation of the guy's answer. He refuses this proposal with a smile, because he was not interested. The system at the end of the dialogue decides to accrue a certain number of points for his rigidity. The leader of the sect of great changes was interested in why the guy refuses so easily. He decides to explain this with verses from books, which slightly amazes the girl. He continues to speak with lines from the poem without any tension. The girl understands that the guy is actually not as simple as it seemed to her at first glance. She is embarrassed to straighten her hair on her head. She was flattered by such beautiful lines. The leader of the sect was surprised that in fact the cultivator was so well-read and erudite. The girl apologizes to him for her reckless offer, because it was wrong on her part. He grinks, receiving additional experience from the system. He asks to forgive him, explaining that in fact he cannot remain with them. The girl laughs in response, noting that the guy, although slightly wild, is not a cruel guy. He realizing that he is not very cruel from the outside to increase his cruelty to the maximum. The girl looks away from the guy back to the square. The girl adds that in fact she is very envious of the careless life of the guy. The leader calls the guy unbridled with unique skills, which can easily travel and do not depend on anyone. He decides to invite the girl to go with him on a short trip and distract from everyday life. The girl no less would like to go on any journey. She explains that she is not able to just leave the sect for a while due to all the events. The girl explains that demonic sects come and constantly bother the whole sect with their threats. In this monologue, he observes an interesting fact that the presence of a large number of people. She, without unnecessary suspicions, confirms that crowds of demonic sectarians often come to them, periodically inviting students to the stage of the golden nucleus. He kept looking at the girl enthusiastically, because he came up with a plan. The girl asks the guy not to be reckless, noting that they are not as simple as it seems to him. He is self-confident, as in any other situation. He assures that the girl should not worry while he protects them. Having lowered her eyes, she adds that this will all last until he leaves them. The leader did not understand how she would later protect the sect in his absence. He agrees with the stupidity of his decision and begins to ponder the alternative. He decides to attract the system. The guy asks the one to find out what weapons they can protect the sect of great changes. The system begins to search for alternative protective objects and offers the guy to use the divine homemade gun. The system complements this by the fact that this gun was unremarkable, but spent one spiritual stone and caused damage to the initial stage of origin. He sharply begins to laugh, which slightly introduces into the bewilderment of the leader of great changes. He assures the girl that he should not worry, and he has already come up with the perfect device to protect the sect. He adds that his method will protect the sect. The next day, he gets up early and immediately goes to the treasury of the sect of great changes. He comes closer and asks a student to skip him by permission of the leader of the Su sect. Going inside, he took advantage of valuable metals located there to start the workpiece of the right gun. Taking all 99 pieces of black iron, he was enough to start making a gun. At the end, he holds a strange light in his hand, goes to the square. He released the molten green lotus in front of him. He begins to make the gun. The gun gradually began to transform into material form. Without any difficulty, he melts iron, and with the help of the spell he converts the desired shape of the weapon and collects all the equipment. The guy rejoices in the completion of such a complex artifact. Having met one of the students, he kindly asks the guy to call the leader Su to the square to demonstrate new weapons. The student asked when he wants to meet and whether he filled the visit card. Paren did not quite understand what kind of potatoes we're talking about. and repeatedly asks to bring the leader of the sect to the square if possible. He explains such methods due to the fact that the elders and leader of the sect live in the library where visiting for others is limited. The guy agrees with the decision to fill out a business card. The student asks to describe the purpose of the visit that he will describe on the card. He begins to praise himself in all its glory in several proposals, and then describe his purpose. He agrees with this, and spacingly praises himself at the beginning and reduces the ending with a more important part. The hero, with a serious face, asks the guy to write so that the leader comes to the square in the evening to shoot from his new gun. A student of the sect thanks the great cultivator for such skill, simultaneously interested in how you can call. Without coming up with anything more original, he calls himself a canon deity. The leader of the Sioux sect finished with his main matters. Accompanied by elders, goes to the square. The elders along the way noted that he spent all the iron of their treasury on the production of homemade guns. The girl with a smile explains to the elders that she had previously promised to meet and check the new weapon of the guy. The elders, sighing, try to explain that he spends too many dark iron on his guns and over time their treasury can completely accumulate, which did not please them at all. The leader of the Sioux sect, continuing to go to the square, is trying to explain that the dark iron, which can be sent to the road, will be a good gesture to the guy. The girl climbing the stairs adds that the guy plans to help resolve some of their problems with other sects. The day came to an end, and everything around was slowly plunged at the night of the time. Next to he stood the same test version of the sect weapon. In the thoughts of the elders, they also continued to believe that he spent materials designed an ordinary gun. He decides to be the first to contact and say hello to the sectarians. He offers to choose a goal in the form of a mountain for the first test shot from a gun. The girl agrees with the decision of the guy, noting that among the year there are several species of animals and no more. One of the elders believes that the mountains are too far away and the gun he can leave a dent. He enthusiastically asks the sectarians to prepare and be witnesses to the first shot of this gun. He takes magic a stone taken earlier from the treasury. Putting the stone as a nucleus, the gun sharply flashed with a golden flame. The whole gun was covered with a flame and was ready for a trial shot directed uphill. The elders were also slightly surprised, because the gun was not quite ordinary. He uses the cannon spell so that it shoots. The gun in the muzzle began to gradually flash, approaching a key shot. With all his strength, the gun sharply shoots towards the mountains, raising a cloud of dust behind him. After the shot, the core easily gets to one of the mountains. The whole sky flashed with light as if it had already light, which greatly struck the sectarians. The light gradually turned back into the dusk, but the mountain, which was previously chosen as a goal, continued to actively burn. Due to such a powerful shot, the mountain was covered with flames. The forests flashed in the fire and began to burn. The girl continued to silently observe such a strong fire, unable to move in surprise. He also continued to stand at the gun in anticipation when the girl wakes up and tells about her impressions. He grinned slightly, because he himself did not expect such a power. In his thoughts, he understood that he used this gun on the mountain in front of the sect. He did not see any problems in front of him and even a burnt forest. He notes that he would take a stone of spirit from the treasury in return for a shot. He comes closer and is interested in whether the leader Sue is satisfied with this creation. The girl is interested in strengthening whether he was on his own for the gun. At that moment, he nods the girls approvingly. The leader of the Sioux sect is interested in whether he was able to make this gun in only one night. With a smile and unable to lie to the girl, he nods in response again. He takes a spiritual stone from his pocket, noting that it is with the help of his sectarians that will be able to shoot. He adds that it is spiritual stones that contribute to solving problems with the raids of demonic sectarians. He decides to help the village again, offering to make 2 more guns on the remaining raw materials. The elders were in amazement from such skill. The elders, taking a part, thanks to him for such a service with a proposal to help make the remaining 2 guns. The leader of the Sioux also thanks the guy for seriously weapons for their sect. He smiles friendly to the girl, rejoicing that the leader of the sect liked his gift. The next morning, waking up, the guy slowly goes to the porch of his house. He understands that he was sitting strongly and he should go back to the forest for the farm monsters, because he needs experience. At this moment, the unknown sect arrived at the gate of the sect to demand from the Sioux-Danish sect. He reluctantly goes to the parade ground, wondering why unknown sectarians arrived in Sioux sect. An unknown guy decides to rude, he sent it away. He abruptly and at an incredible speed catches him and raises his head up. He demands from the guy to stop saying anything in the future. He directs his energy to the guy holding his hand. The guy begins to resist him and try to say something in pain. The rest of the sectarians, without inventing anything more original, decide to attack the lonely. Without any effort, he scatters self-confident bandits to the side. He decides to touch the leader of the whole gang with his foot so that he flies away at a more distant distance. The whole gang scans raises a ball of dust. By accidentally killing one of the cultivators, he receives additional glasses, which he cannot please the guy. Gradually, all sectarians come to their senses and try to get to their feet, except for their leader. One of the sectarians notes that he is not from a sect of great changes, not understanding why he protects the enemies of the sect of persecution of wind. He grins from the name of the persecution of the winds, explaining that this is his choice to protect the sect of great changes. The man did not quite understand what the guy tried to tell him. He calls the sect of persecution of the wind a laughing stock due to such a wretched name, calling the sect of exploding heaven much cooler. A man without hearing earlier about the sect of exploding heaven decides to ask for where it is. One of the elders begins to laugh slightly from the words The elders of great changes have admired that the name of the sect of persecution of the wind really sounds wretched and funny. The man begins to laugh loudly from everything that is happening that begins to strain the surviving sectarians. The girl continued to watch the actions. He with a grin expected further development from the sect of the persecution of the wind. The leader of the Sioux sect was amazed at how smart he was and strong. Unable to withstand such humiliation, the sectarian threatened with death after leading their leader. One of the elders, hearing about reinforcements, demanded to detain the sectarian, but he immediately runs away, which he himself allows. He believes that it would be the perfect moment to use new divine guns on the enemy. The girl does not quite imagine how exactly the guy was going to do it. Having finished with 2 other guns for sunset, he demonstrates the elders and leader new guns. The elders continue to look with admiration for jewelry work. He begins to hear the strange approximation of strangers, that he does not cease to delight him. A small detachment of sectarians, being near the SU leader, began to look around. The leader of the Wind Persecution sect demands that the sect of great changes immediately come out. The man is also interested in how the ordinary guy dared to kill his student. Without inventing anything original, he simply begins to laugh it off from the sectarian. The girl also smiled at a confusion, realizing that he was not able to give a serious answer. One of the sectarians of the persecution of the wind notes that the sect of great changes sent guns to them. 3 guns who built him. He hopedly directed his barrels towards the sectarians. The leader of the sect laughed that the sectarians of great changes use ordinary guns. The leader of the Sioux sect did not understand why the sectarians were so self-confident. One of the elders of the persecution of the wind requires the student to go forward. The leader of the sect puts forward the conditions under which he should at least injure his student, and then he will retain the life of the entire grid. He begins to notice that after these words he began to experience déjà vu. He gladly agrees with the conditions of the sectarian, asking him in the future not to abandon his words. He charges the gun with a magic stone and decides to shoot directly at the leader of the persecution of the wind. The beam of a shot from the gun was so powerful that it dispersed all the dust in the district. The shot rushed a centimeter from the leader of the sect of the persecution of the wind. The leader of the sect, not having time to come to his senses, is awakening sharply. The elder is interested in whether their leader is in order. The man notices that the leader of the persecution of the wind was deprived of his hand. The man could not believe that he was deprived of his right hand. The leader of your sectarians screamed loudly with severe pain. The scream was so loud that even he and the leader of the sect Sue paid attention to this. He laughs at his trying to apologize to the sectarians for such a powerful shot. He offers to make a few more shots towards the attackers of the sectarians, offering the girl this time to manage the gun. Having become next to each of the 3 guns, the sectarians directed the guns towards the sect of persecution of the wind. The sectarians of the persecution of winds were still not recalled after such a powerful shot from a regular gun. Without waiting for the sectarians to come to their senses, the leader of the Sioux sect and the elders produce several more shots. He notices how part of the sectarians manages to dodge and survive after the shot, calling it a miss. Many sectarians comprehend the fate of the hand of their leader by erasing those forever from the face of the earth. The elder of the persecution of the wind of the survivors dodges the next shot of the Sioux sect. The leader, not wanting to continue to stay, will do it closer to the Sioux sect. A man with a grin looks at the sectarians with contempt. He was not worried that he lost his hand. The man claims that in the next battle they will prepare and will fight to the last person with the Sioux sect. He trying to calm down, Sue puts her hand. The girl notices this gesture and pays attention to the guy. He asks a man to calm down and not plan a return trip. The man does not understand what his opponent hints at. He explains that he will not miss this time. He preparing the gun directs that right to the sectarian. Without warning, he shoots again with a gun from the leader of the sect of the persecution of the wind. He simply erases a man from the face of the earth without leaving a chance of saving or using a barrier. From the leader of the sect, only small scraps remain without signs of life. He states with a smile that after his actions no one else will bother the sect of great changes. The girl thanks for the work done and help in general. At that moment, he receives a large number of points for the murder of cultivators. He is in thoughts interested in the system, whether he can also get experience points for killing with guns. He also gains experience for 2 people of the initial stage of origin. The system reports to achieve the stage of the gold nucleus, which means the ability to acquire new artifacts and spells. In his thoughts, he only worried spells from the world of the dead. He confusedly declares that he still wants to save his beloved. He is in hearing that he wants to improve immediately, that the rest of the sectarians notice. He turns to the leader with a statement that he should immediately leave the sect. The girl nods approvingly in response. He disappears from the sect in a blink that the elders also notice, noticing an incredible speed. The system begins to immediately update, showing it in percentage ratio. Upon completion, the system reports on the successful improvement of the system to the 2nd level, as well as the new assortment in the shopping center. He immediately requires that the system begins to search for the possibility of revival of Xiao. At the same minute, the system begins to actively look for the desired recipe. It took the system a few minutes to detect something useful. He continued without taking his eyes to follow the system. The system represents a recipe for the revival of the 9th revolution. The system begins to list all the ingredients for making this potion. He carefully listens to a huge and complex list of each ingredient from the list. It is amazed that the recipe was cheap enough. He clarifies why the system called the price for such a valuable recipe of 2,000 points. This is just the cost of the recipe. Without hesitation, he agrees with the system. He was not worried about the price for the chance to resurrect his lover. The system congratulates its owner to buy a recipe for 9 revolutions. The system alternately talks about each ingredient in difficult places. After listening to the system, he notes for himself that he needed to get a dragon vein in an oriental suburbs of fire. He begins to analyze everything that the system said, and also that the veins are located in the imperial tomb, where the previous emperors are buried. He screams a scream of an evil joke, because all the ingredients were almost inaccessible to an ordinary guy. He will have to visit absolutely every tomb of 4 peoples and pick up on valuable material. The system explains that all the ingredients that the guy will have to find is an essence that can only be obtained in imperial tombs. He begins to be very angry with such a serious task, demanding that the system stops making him even more diligently improve his abilities. He did not know what to do in such a situation, because it was his only chance to revive his lover. He begins to laugh angrily, which slightly introduces the system into confusion. He sets himself up on a serious trip to 4 great countries to get all herbs. He begins to laugh even louder than saying that he is not at all worried about who all these emperors are, because they are not able to stop him at anything. He also recalls that the former owner of his body was deceived by the emperor of a fiery nation by depriving him of absolutely everything. He took his 2-handed sword, believes that this is a great moment to return to the nation of fire. He, standing in the middle of the field under the strong wind developing his hair, states that the son-in-law of the Emperor of Fire is returning to his homeland. Closer to night, actions are transferred back to the sect of great changes. The leader of the Su sect approaches the house where he had previously lived and asks for the permission to enter. Entering inside, she watches that the room was completely empty. He apologizes for such a sharp care and asks to use the spells that he described in the next letter. The girl, unable to resist, begins to cry. Tears slowly fell one after another to words about fate and further meeting. She could not believe that the guy just left her and left only the method of using the spell. The girl, upset with the letter, decides to go to the bed where he had previously been lying. It was difficult for her to survive the parting with him, because she unexpectedly fell in love with the guy. The girl lying on the pillow, he continued to feel the small warmth of the guy's body. Actions are transferred far to the mountainous area. He, as always, wandered alone, continued to move towards the border of the people of fire. The guy noted that he would need about a month, or even 2, before he reaches the imperial city. The guy decides to analyze all the costs of the SU sect. He was also not happy with the parting with the girl and wanted to stay for a while. He also observes that where he has to get too dangerous, because many of the people of fire had experience, and at least the 6th stage of the transformation of the origin. He recalled the destruction of Zhang's sect, and the fact that being a leader in the 5th stage, he did not receive a scratch from his powerful spell. He understood that since Zhang was in the 5th stage, then the 6th leaders would be able to deal with him easily. He slowly but confidently continued to move towards the border of the people of fire, and he notices a small building on the border. The flag raised at the entrance showed that this building was only an ordinary T, which the guy desperately did not have enough at this time. Having stepped closer, he asks the old man to bring him a cold drink and quickly. With a friendly face, the elder does not understand what the guy was talking about, explaining that he has only tea. Having swung, he decides to change the order and asks to bring him any tea. He begins to yawn from his order to be tired. Somewhere nearby, the sounds of hooves and a guard were sounded, demanded everyone to give way immediately. The inhabitants looked around the luxurious carriage, gradually parted by letting the TU. One of the resident, noting a luxurious carriage, suggests that there is a noble lord, or more inside. Without turning to the carriage, he continues to look at one point. The carriage sharply rushed near the guy's table, but he did not try to react. The wagon from the girl slowly passes by, which he completely did not pay attention to the guy. The princess is interested in her friend. She remembers whether she is still a Zuo. The girl was puzzled by this because all people discuss this person in the border zone. She believes that rumors about the guy are exaggerated, and he could not even physically kill so many people. The princess agrees with her friend, because the guy just ran away and did not take anything from the sect. The princess adds that she was already familiar with him 6 years ago. The girl is interested in the son-in-law, which the emperor sent to the lands of fire. She confirms the guesses of the girl, adding that he was already dead. The girl asks if the princess is sure that the guy died. The princess repeatedly confirms, referring to the words of eyewitnesses not so long ago. She decides to freeze from the words of the princess. Turning her head back in the window, the girl recalls how she had previously met with him, noticing his good character. The girl was sorry to listen to such a painful fate. The princess claims that he will never forget the guy and will keep him in the heart. The girl is interested in why the princess does not want to stop everything that is happening. The princess tells her version of events with a slightly different outcome, which was more sad. The girl noted that the concubine of Huan was previously with him in charm. The princess explains that she cannot contradict the ambitions of her father. She finishes the dialogue, realizing that everything is a cruel reality. The girl again looks out the window. The girl is visited by a thought, and she offers to find out more about him and all rumors about him. The princess does not see anything interesting in this, believing that the name is nothing more than a coincidence. The princess noted that at that time he had already lost all his skills and could not use magic due to the lack of spiritual power. The girl agrees with the princess. At this moment, the carriage finishes passing the border zone, heading in an unknown direction. At this moment, he still fights the monster for himself. Applying his two-handed sword, he easily cuts the monster in half. He brings a sword over his head for a final blow. With all his strength, the guy hits his ground on the ground without leaving, and the chances of salvation by the monster. Having finished the battle, he wipes sweat from his forehead with fatigue. He gradually begins to receive his experience in the murder of such a ferocious monster. The system announces an event that should be expected in 7 days. Since his master chose 5 elements of art, then he will have access to complexity, hell. Sharply do not understand where from all sides he surrounds the sectarians in white hoodies. The sectarians silently watch the guy's actions, which he a little alert. He silently continues to look at strange sectarians. The sectarians, in turn, also examine the guy closely. Without noticing the desired goal and danger in general, all sectarians quickly leave the guy and go in an unknown direction. Na begins to think about such a strange meeting, analyzing who those sectarians could be. Realizing that he had not met earlier, he decides to score for it and return to the city. Along the way, he stumbles on the wheel in appearance recently falling off. Following the wheel, he notices a carriage covered by a flame without any people. He did not quite understand why the wagon previously passing next to him was already lies in the fire. Taking his two-handed sword, he decides to find out the reason for the fire of the cart. He begins to analyze the cause of the fire and where people could go. He suggests that those sectarians in white hoodies and red masks were chasing people sitting in a carriage. At that moment, the sectarians in white hoodies continued to patrol the area in search of the princess. One of the sectarians, without observing the princess, flies by. The princess and her friend do not move, continuing to sit in the bushes near the burned carriage. The girl did not understand why the sectarians from a metal nation declared a hunt for them. The princess analyzing what the sectarians look like, it suggests that these were the murderers of the Tian Sha who were at the initial stage of the emergence. The girl was not knowing this sect decides to ask the princess about Tian Sha. The princess notes white hoodies and red masks in sectarians, which the Tian Sha sect has always used. The princess decides to act and move on, because they should not be linger in one place. The princess recalled her deceased Narrowed, who at any moment was ready to save them. The princess explains to her friend that she is the goal, and luring the sectarians will let her friend run away. The girl claims that she will be with the princess forever, and will not leave her even in difficult times. The princess was struck by the courage of her novices and part-time friend. The princess also distinguished the stubbornness of the girl and the power of the spirit like herself. The princess slowly stands behind the tree looking around. The princess gives her hand to her novice and helps him to get up. Girls slowly but confidently begin to move from shelters to shelter, getting to the chatter of the city. The girl decides to support the conversation by the fact that she still believes that he is alive and fully complies with the criterion that he owned before they met. The princess, not wanting to listen about, he asks the girl to forget about the guy and continue to move. The princess claims that she hoped to see in her husband's much more unusual than a person than he is. At that moment, in front of the girls there was a loud explosion. Lying trees in the district. A huge snake located in front of the girls loudly hissed on those. At this moment, not understand where, and he himself appears with his wishes to kill a miserable monster. Having taken advantage of his sword, he throws herself on a snake, cutting it with only one blow. The girls looked in amazement at the mysterious savior. Having finished dealing with the monster, he raises his head and watches two girls who, in his opinion, were hostages of the attack. The girls in bewilderment continue to look at the mysterious savior. He sharply turns to the girls with his back, wanting to put on a mask that hides his appearance. He asks the system to purchase a mask and put on the one as a new person. He took the mask, instantly clings to his face. The girls did not understand how the guy was at the stage of the golden nuclei to kill the monster with only one blow. The princess decides to turn to the mysterious savior with a request to stay and help them in salvation. Having changed in the face, he turns to the girls interested in the girls. What can he do? The guy's face was so attractive that any girl appreciated his appearance. The princess was slightly embarrassed by such a beautiful guy. He accrued a small number of stiffness glasses for this. The girl was embarrassed by the presence of such a beautiful man. The princess could not believe that there were people of such an attractive appearance. The princess, standing under a small wind, watches the guy's developing hair and how calm he was looking at her. The princess continued to analyze the appearance of the guy and his facial features. Everything that was present at the guy attracted her. The girl gradually began to fall in love with an unknown guy, suggesting that anyone could succumb to the charm of the guy. The princess's friend approached the guy, decides to speak with him. The princess still could not look away from his charming appearance. The girl decides to tell everything and how exactly they fell into the forest. The girl asked the guy to help them accompanied, and in return, generously reward him. He, realizing that the girls are not, and the imperial palace begins to agree with the decision to spend girls to the city. He decides to ask who people are in white hoodies and red masks and why they haunt them. The girl is surprised that he also met with white hoodies. He waves off the girl and undertakes to accompany those to the city until they get into safety. In the end, the girl smiles in the end. That is why he receives an additional 70 points of cruel actions. The princess still silently looked at the guy, unable to look away. The princess thanks the guy, embarrassed for his kindness in such a difficult situation. He begins to accompany the girls into the depths of the forest. Those, in turn, dutifully follow an unknown savior. In the moment, one of the girls decides to withdraw to talk. The guy turns to the girls. The girl is interested in the unknown, how she should contact the guy. It seems to be a fictitious name from the fraction of exploding heaven. Girls ask about the fraction of the exploding heaven, as if before they have never heard of such a sect. It seemed that the girls also drew attention to his name, clarifying if those previously his name had heard. The girl explains that earlier she already had a friend named Zui. He, understanding what everything leads to, decides to complete the conversation and continue to move through the forest. He knew who exactly he accompanied and what was waiting for those in the future. Determining the fire and gaining a little water in the vessel, the guy puts him to bask. He also succeeded in the capture of food. Preparing the chicken, the guy prepared those for cooking. He believes that they should not rush and eat well until the next day. The guy also offers girls to swim in the nearest stream. The girl, laughing, asks the guy not to worry about them because they were in order. It seemed strange because before he did not meet girls who did not like cleanliness. At the end of cooking, he divides food into all three. The princess noticed a delicious smell published from chicken. The girl took one chicken to her princess in order to reinforce her. The princess, in turn, rejects her friend's offer, noting that she is from the royal family and will not eat such food. He, convinced of his guesses, clarifies those families from the royal Lee girls. The girl, realizing that this can create problems for them, immediately to deny. The princess understands that she was mistaken and began to fall in. He abruptly gets up from behind the fire, overturning the vessel with water. He repeatedly clarifies whether the royal family of the girlfriend and who she was. He applies the spell, directs him to the girl. The princess was trying to understand that after he heard, the guy wants to do with her. He, with the help of magic, hits the princess in the face with a whip blow. The princess begins to cough strongly from the flow of water. The girl runs up to the princess, wanting to help him. The girl begins to understand that the guy was not ordinary passers-by. The princess, using his position, demands that the guy calm down and behave more tactfully, because she is from the royal family and he can easily kill all his family members. He does not act on such manipulations that he is the only one who remained from his family. He decides to demonstrate his real appearance, so that the girl finally understands who he was. He talks about all the suffering through which the last carrier of the body has passed. He adds that after the death of the guy, his body merged with his consciousness and left all the memories of the past life. He holds the mask in his hands, expecting a reaction from the girls. He, mocking the girls, is interested in the princess, whether she forgot his real appearance so quickly. The girl could not believe what she saw, because the real he was dead for a long time. The girl calls the protagonist by name, realizing that it was he. He lowers the eye to the ground with an embittered face. The guy asks for why the girl believed that it was impossible, because the heavens themselves gave him a second chance. He calls on his two-handed sword in order to deal with the family of the Emperor of the People of Fire. He wanted to finish the reign of the G family of a fiery nation once and for all. Having directed the sword to the prince, the girl sharply covers with that her body, not wanting to allow him to kill the princess. The girl asks the guy to stop, recalling that he promised to bring them to the city safe. He, with a serious face, explains the simple truth, namely, that he does not always keep his words. The girl asks to wait for Sue so that the guy would be patient and listen to her truth. The princess, realizing that they have no other choice, decides to use magic. The princess calls for a flute in her hands, adding that the G family does not need to explain to the homeless orphan. The princess begins to play strange music on the flute, attracting the attention of everyone in the district. The sectarians in white hoodies begin to feel a strange wave emanating from the depths of the forest. All sectarians stopped abruptly and turned into the opposite side. The sectarians noted that the sound was made by a jade flute of the people of the sun, which meant the presence of a princess still in the forest. Yue understands that the girl in this way tried to attract attention to the sectarians. At this moment, sectarians in white hoodies, in an attempt to kill the princess first, jumped out of the forest. One of the sectarians, without taking Shu at the stage of the golden nucleus, declares the princess that she was driven in the corner and will be immediately eliminated. Sue, with a grin, agrees that the girl's plan is really good, but he could not allow other people to kill the girl. He drives away all sectarians from the camp with a whip. At the same second, Jui applies a spell and calls for ice fire, which was supposed to finish a short battle. The sectarian, still without perceiving Shui for the opponent, immediately moves in an attack. The guy increases his magical technique at spraying the one in the region. Waves of ice fire captured one after another sectarians in hoodies. All sectarians instantly were covered with ice without signs of life and the chances of salvation. The ice floes gradually began to crack. All the killed sectarians no longer felt pain. The ice floes instantly scattered, as if there were no sectarians initially. The princess understands that now she was left against Shui one-on-one. The princess did not plan to escape. She was only worried about one question: how the guy managed to survive. C, coming close enough, grabs the girl by the throat and lifts it in front of her. The princess, being above the ground, began to choke slowly. Shui was soullessly to look at the defenseless girl. He is interested. Why can he not kill the girl if it is the will of heaven? The princess's friend was powerlessly watched what was happening. The guy, with a mockery, tells the princess that the day came when he would destroy the entire nation of fire. The girl tries to justify her actions at that moment, pointing to his hopeless position when Shui was poor. He did not understand that the girl tried to say so rude words. He throws the girl to the floor, interested in whether they can save that wealth and status in such a situation. The guy decides not to dwell on this, but he did not want to kill the princess right away. The girl, falling to the ground, began to cough hard. He repeatedly declares that he plans to kill the girl for a long time and painfully. The girl, lowering her head, does not dare to say something in response. The princess's friend continued to keep silently to observe what was happening. The guy adds that death will be the most painful punishment for the girl. He approaches the fire and picks up the fallen chicken, wanting to use it again. Zhu shows the girl's chicken previously prepared for girls. The girl was interested in the princess what they should do this time. The princess, not seeing another chance, decides to take advantage of the wine received by the people. The girl asks the princess not to risk it like that, because the wine was poisonous, and if Shui finds out, then they will not be greeted. The princess assures that there is no other way out for her, how to try to poison the guy. The girl repeatedly tries to dissuade the princess from such a reckless decision, because Shui was especially smart and dangerous than ordinary sectarians. The princess, bowing his head, believes that Shui remained her faithful until the end of her life. She also said that it was the concubine who was dressed as a princess and buried the guy. The girl believes that because of the remaining feelings, Shui still does not kill her and wants to punish her. The princess's friend was still not pleasing to such an outcome of events. The girl gathered her thoughts and decides to use the stored wine, because this could be the only opportunity to save. The girl did not want to allow the complete destruction of the people of fire. The princess applies her stored ring. The girl brings her hand to the princess, to which she repels the concubine. A vessel with wine appears in the princess's hand, on which she also imposes a spell. The girl for the last time asks the princess to change his mind and not try to poison Sue. The girl grabs the princess for her dress, but this does not stop her. The princess repeatedly asks to release it to implement a pre-war plan. Going to Shui, the girl believed that only her father could kill the guy without any difficulty. The princess planned to kill the guy for the second time with his own hands. Shu pays attention to the princess coming to him. The girl carries in 2 hands an unknown drink that the guy notices. The girl turns to the guy to join. The princess is trying to put pressure on the guy and his hopelessness in such a harsh world. The girl recalls that earlier they spent 6 years together, and they cannot simply be taken and forgotten. The princess holds out 1 glass of wine to the guy so that Shui drank with her. The princess invents the ceremony in which their bonds of marriage will instantly dissipate after eating wine, and he will not have to kill it later. He carefully considers everything said to the girl. The princess experiencing, he continues to stand in anticipation of a decision. The princess suggests that she was mistaken, and the guy completely lost her feelings for her, and all 6 years drooped into oblivion. He states that he has a principle to which he adheres to. He adds that he does not drink with 2 types of people, namely the dead and the dissolute, noting that the princess is suitable for both criteria. The girl, unable to withstand insults in her direction and forgetting, tries to offend the guy in response. He, pointing with a finger at the princess, reminds what position at the moment is at the moment. The girl continues to hold 2 containers with wine, suggesting that she was opened, but with a desire to try again. The girl, gritting her teeth, states that the only mistake of Za all her life was to marry such an unpleasant person. The girl adds that she wants to terminate their bonds and not stay with him until his death. The girl has tears on her face. She is interested in whether the guy will approve her last request. Tears slowly flew along the princess's innocent cheek. 1 tear fell in front of the girl's feet. He comes closer to see the sincerity in the face of the girl. He decides to agree with the girl and terminate their bonds once and for all. A small smirk appeared on the girl because she managed to mislead. The girl conveys the desired container with poison. He, taking the container, decides to consider the presence of poisons or other harmful substances. Having taken advantage of the system, he asks the one to evaluate the liquid in the container. The system dutifully talks about the contents in its container. The system also adds that he can easily deprive the girl of abilities if he personally gives a drink to a girl. He decides to clarify that at that moment the princess was in a container. The system reports that the girl's wine was ordinary. He uses the spell and changes the liquid in containers in places. The girl, not suspecting that she drinks all the poison drinks in 1 gulp, he made sure that his liquid is also safely drinking it in 1 gulp. A smile slowly cut through the princess's face, because in her opinion the plan worked. The girl does not immediately decide to inform the guy, expecting side effects about liquid. The princess with a mockery tells that the guy drank poison and soon lose all his abilities and skills. He clarifies with a smile that the princess meant these words. The concubine slowly approached the princess, wondering what was happening. The girl, mocking the guy, decides to tell her entire plan and how slowly the guy will rot. The girl with a smile recalls that it was this wine that he drank and therefore will be dead before he tries to kill her. With a smile, he assures that he drank the wine based on yin-yang. He tells the girl that he drank absolutely simple wine, which amazes the girl. He calls the princess a heartless woman with a mockery. The princess still could not understand how the guy managed to find out the contents of the container. He reminds the girl that she had previously planned to harm him and decided on this act again. He, with a grin, explains that he initially pulled out the girl's plan and now wants to look at the torment of the princess. The girl does not understand what the guy is talking about and what torment. The concubine also runs up and is interested in the guy that he added to the wine besides poison. He throws a saucer from which he drank wine to the ground. He slowly gets up, saying that he had changed the wine with a spell. The guy slowly approaches the princess and takes the one by the face. He suggests that soon, unable to restrain himself from the temptation, the girl herself will begin to take off her clothes. The princess blushes his hand, blushing, and backs back. The girl gradually begins to feel the heat inside herself, because of which the princess begins to be nervous. He, with a serious face, reminds the girl that he warned of the consequences if she tries to do something. The girl begins to breathe hard. All her clothes begin to gradually get wet with severe heat. Exhausting, the girl slowly begins to fall to the ground, losing consciousness. The concubine was embarrassed by the behavior of the princess and did not know what to do in this case. Unable to withstand the princess, the girls fall to the ground together. He is amazed at the princess's wild feelings since she decided to attack her friend. The guy begins to go back to stand aside. The princess begins to touch her friend, unable to restrain her feelings. The concubine, unable to withstand such a shame, uses the spell with his hand causing water. The girl directs the spell to her friend, pushing her back. The girl puts the princess into the water sphere, restraining her animal instinct. He was slightly amazed that the concubine from the people of the water. The princess, leaning against the wall of the sphere, silently watched the guy. The girl is powerlessly falling to his knees in front of him, asking the princess to help and remove the spell from that. He explains that he does not see the need for this, and will only be glad if the princess dies in torment. The girl repeatedly asks to save the princess in return, offering all her development of cultivation and spiritual root, as well as other privileges that she is able to provide. He refuses development and a possible slave. The guy was not very interested in this. The girl is confused to ask what exactly the guy wanted to get for the salvation of the princess. Having taken up the chin, he pondered everything slightly. He claims that he is only interested in one defeat. He sits on the log and decides to tell the girl the artifact of interest to him. He asks the girl to bring a map of imperial tombs of the people of fire and water in return for the salvation of the princess. The guy gives a word and reaches out with the conditions that if a girl fulfills her part of the persuasion, he will let the princess let go. The girl understands that if she agrees, her actions can lead to chaos inside the empires. The girl also notes that before that everyone who tried to get to the imperial tombs had no longer returned. The princess at that moment continued to be in the water sphere and asked her friend to help. He stares at the girl in anticipation of a positive answer and the cards brought. The princess repeatedly asks the girl to help her, adding that she feels bad. The girl realizing that she is powerless before he agrees to this condition. He takes out a small pebble, calling him the soul of the souls of 3 corpses, which will be their contract. The girl immediately takes the ball and swallows. He explains that after that, if the girl tries to deceive him, then only by the power of thought he will kill her. After that, he dispels the sphere. Where was the princess? The girl immediately begins to fall powerlessly to the ground. At the last moment, he catches the princess and holds with a grin in his arms. He puts his boyfriend in his mouth, which the princess immediately feels. In the moment, do not understand how the princess overturns and sits on him from above. He himself was slightly embarrassed, because this feeling was previously unprecedented, and he was amazed at such a strange touch to another person. The concubine turned away, standing aside, waiting for the couple to finish disperse the attached spell on the girl. The princess silently expected when the guy would do everything. The girl still could not control her body. The girl asks he not to stop and continue to administer her body. He and the girl began to move in time as if music played on the background. Having finished, and the girl plunges into a loving kiss, which dragged on slightly. The concubine, without restraining his shame behind the princess, covers his face. Without restraining his feelings, he overtures the girl on the grass and becomes from above. The princess is breathing heavily because of the acting poison. The girl's face blushed strongly with embarrassment. He, realizing that he has no other choice, nevertheless decides to make what he has begun. The fusion of 2 bodies from which everyone around could hear obscene sounds made by a girl begins. The princess, despite her genealogy, could not restrain his emotions from his actions. He grabbed the grass and continued to expel demons from the princess with the help of his magic wand. The girl screamed loudly for the last time, after which a grave silence came in the whole forest. The concubine, hidden behind the tree nearby, embarrassed, expected when he would finish and come to her. Having finished ritual actions, he is half naked from a strong heat come out to the girl, which slightly scares her. He put the elbow on the tree, announces that he managed to save the girl from painful death. The concubine thanks the guy for his work. He adds with a serious face that he later plans to go to the imperial city, and by that time the concubine should already get for him a map of imperial tombs. The concubine, rising from behind the tree, begins to go to the princess, saying that she remembers the agreement perfectly, and she should not threaten. The concubine approached the princess and decides to help him after a potent magic. The princess, in an unconscious position, lies in the hands of the concubine. He watched the girls grin slightly from the work done. He felt something strange, looking around, starting to suspect that a man was nearby at the stage of transformation of the emergence. The concubine asks the guy to leave, because the princess previously informed the nearest city about the aid signal to which several cultivators came. He, praising his skill, notes that he is not scared by cultivators even at the initial stage. The concubine looks at the guy. The girl understood that the guy really was not joking. He takes off into the air and asks to forget about everything that happened to them and fulfill the promise in the near future. He also adds to the girls that it will not be difficult for him to kill girls with only 1 power of thought. The girls understand that they are in a serious danger, but they do not dare to say that either. The next day, he is on a tree alone, sorting out objects in his inventory. The system calculating the chance of success tells the guy about the new offer to acquire new relics and equipment. Having moved to the armor section, he considers new levels of armor and their appearance. The whole current armor was useless, and the newer was more expensive and looked more impressive for its level. Having looked at the novelties in the armor, he understands that most of them he had previously met in the games of his past life and knows their characteristics by heart. He analyzes every armor in order to choose the battle of the course style of the battle needed under his current style. Having finished analysis, he acquires armor in 500 points. He was glad that he managed to acquire such useful armor under his current battle style. He infuriated that his need for glasses did not justify his zeal in search of new monsters. He decides to find a new way to earn glasses while he expects a concubine with the maps of imperial tombs. At this moment, several cultivators underwent a sect that were previously unknown under the tree. One of the cultivator was inspired by such an early set in the sect of the Valley of the Incense of the Sky. All three were in a hurry to register participation in the tests. The second cultivator said that they already knew about one of the first tests that they should have passed as soon as possible. The cultivators continued to carefully go towards the sect, without suspecting that at that moment he watched them. He notes that this test for him can be more than entertaining in the near future. One of the cultivators stops noting the unknown figure a few meters from the group. Cultivators immediately notice a strong aura emitting from an unknown man with snow, white hair, and bloody red dress. Cultivators, realizing that a man is not a threat, immediately welcomed that each by name. One of the cultivators, with curiosity, is interested in whether such a strong cultivator plans to take part in testing in the local sect. The man seems to be Hua Wuqiue, adding that he is also in a hurry for testing, but does not know where to go. He gives a good aura out of himself, asks the cultivators of help accompanied to the place of tests. One of the cultivators is interested in the rest, whether they are not averse to helping a man accompanied. The cultivator was flattered by the so polite Hua, and his serious look more like an experienced and tempered cultivator. He, hiding behind the disguise, continues to play the role of a non-existing man. He learns that the sect of the Valley of Heavenly Incense was one of the 3 largest sects in the Fiery Nation, which gained students every 100 years. He also learns that the set consisted of many tests that checked skills and readiness for all cultivators. Many cultivators are not able to get the keys to the solutions of all trials, and are eliminated in the first difficulty. A group of cultivators quickly arrives at the barrier of this sect through which everyone had to go. A strong fiery glow appears in the face of cultivators. One of the cultivators begins to cough loudly, giving a signal to his friends. In front of the cultivators, there was a huge fiery wall, which each of the participants was supposed to pass without anyone's help. Cultivators are interested in whether he prepared an artifact to protect and overcome the firewall. He immediately explains that he was not preparing at all for such simple tests. One of the cultivator offers to borrow his artifact to overcome such a dangerous test in his opinion. The cultivator extends the artifact, explaining the properties of this. He thanks the cultivator for kindness and help, but he kindly refuses to explain that he himself can calmly go through the firewall. One of the cultivator he asks not to assert himself, because the artifact proposed previously was rare and had any value. He, with a grin, asks the cultivators not to worry about him, because the guy had everything under control. The cultivator grows his teeth because of the arrogant he and decides to go first. The cultivator uses its prepared artifact and begins to pass through the purple sphere of the wall of fire. The cultivator says goodbye to his comrades, offering to meet on the other side. The second cultivator, using an artifact in the form of a lamp, is also directed to the wall of fire. A guy with little effort and a little weaker artifact also successfully passes the wall of fire. The last cultivator is saying to him, and he proposes to stop wasting time and meet on the other side. He asks the cultivator to also hurry to go through the wall of fire so that he does not accidentally damage the topics. The cultivator does not fully understand how exactly he planned to undergo this test. The cultivator uses its artifact and also enters the wall of fire. The cultivator says goodbye to him and asks to protect himself until their next meeting. He gets a few stiffness points for his insolence and self-confidence with cultivators. The entire floor under the wall of fire was covered with hot lava, which he himself had already determined. Several caretakers at this time watch the passage of the first test. One of the caretakers notes that they still have not been able to find weak cultivators who would not be able to pass the wall of fire. The girl explains that most of the cultivators were prepared in advance, and the informant was directly among them. The caretaker, using the sphere, asks her girlfriend to observe the fact that the unknown guy was still at the beginning of the first test. The girl notes that he was quite attractive, but without a chance of passing this test. At this moment, 2 of the 3 cultivators already managed to go through the first test. Both cultivators could not get enough that they managed to go through the wall of fire. Then one and the third cultivator of the group come out of the wall, welcoming the rest. All of them exchange their impressions of passing the firewall. The group decides to continue moving further towards registration. One of the cultivators is asking to wait, because he was still somewhere in the wall of fire. Cultivators believe that since he abandoned the artifact, he has no chance of passing a fiery wall. Two cultivators, not wanting to wait for a presumptuous guy, are heading towards registration. At the entrance, the caretaker notifies the cultivators that they should be registered further. One of the caretakers becomes a pity that he was actually just a window dresser and could not pass the firewall. At that moment, he was still at the start of the test, thinking about what to apply. When he addressed the system, he is interested in whether all participants have passed the firewall, to which he receives an affirmative answer. He understands that he was now able to apply his methods to pass the first test. He takes out his two-handed sword and applies a spell on it. He waves his sword, creating a strong flow of wind to dispel the low-level spell of the fiery wall. With a cry, "Open it!" he waves his sword, spreading the fiery wall in half. In the area of the firewall, an explosion sounded strongly power. All participants in the moment are very twitching, paying attention to the first test. In the area where the fiery wall was previously located, only small lights on a huge ditch remained. He was not very happy with this outcome, because he had to use only a quarter of his strength. Cultivators in the field of registration could not believe what they saw. In the moment, using the zero-gravity spell, he easily gets to the place of registration of cultivators. He easily lands next to the cultivator awaiting he at the end. He could not recover after what he saw. He only smiled carelessly at a group of cultivators, pretending that there was nothing special in his actions. The cultivator with a smile highlighted his unusual approach to passing the wall of fire. Having appreciated a good gesture, he asks not to flatter him because it was a fairly easy test for him. The caretakers could not understand what they should have done further after the destruction of the first test. The girl with horror notes that this has never happened before their tests. At this moment, one of the elders arrives in order to find out about the past explosion. The man is interested in the caretakers what happened, and what kind of strong vibration went in the field of the first test. Girls are trying to explain about a recent event. Girls add that it was one of the participants who created this with the first test. The elder was not satisfied with such a situation, wanting to meet with that violator. At this moment, carefree, he approaches the organizer, deciding to ask those. He carelessly and friendly decides to turn to one of the organizers with the question of where they should go for further registration. A man with a serious face decides to ask him if he destroyed the fiery wall with his attack. He did not see anything special in his actions as a man not to embarrass him. The man in the moment is annoyed by frivolity and friendliness after his action, because of which he breaks into the guy. The caretaker claims that all participants are removed from participation in tests because of him. The whole group of cultivators was struck by such news. It changes sharply in the face of a more serious one. The caretaker demands that the violators do not go anywhere, because their elder will deal with them and punish them. In his thoughts, one of the cultivators understood that they had the end after this, and now they lost the only chance to attend trials. He calmly decides to call the leaving caretaker to himself. He looks at the caretaker with a serious and slightly frightening gaze. The guy asks the question about exactly where it was indicated that it is forbidden to destroy the firewall. All caretakers understood that they had no such rule, because no one expected that there would be a participant who was able to destroy the firewall. He points to the hole in the rules, continuing to seriously look at all the caretakers. He maliciously shows to the floor and demands that all the caretakers bow their heads as an apology. The elder could not say anything in the strongest stupor. One of the cultivator understood that the caretaker held a high position in the sect, and he was truly insane, demanding such actions from that. Other cultivators continued to watch him in a little fear. The cultivator comes closer to him, believing that he lost his mind in the edge, demanding such low actions from the elder. The caretaker sharply took off into the sky, leaving only dust behind him. The elder could not dare to endure all the humiliations from a self-confident kid deciding to apply his abilities. He calls on his two-handed sword, wanting to enter the battle with the elder. The elder, without noticing all his strength, he still decides to repulse a self-confident guy. In the area where he stood, a strong explosion occurs from the attack of the elder. The caretaker, worried about the elder, screams in the trail. The elder manages to avoid death by jumping to a safer distance. Sticking a step away from the death of the elder, begins to understand that he was actually very strong, and at any moment he could kill a man. Turning to the elder, decides to ask why the elder tried to kill him, not to convince the guy. He adds that he is actually very disappointed in the Valley of Heavenly Incense. The elder could not survive such humiliation by making his face with anger. Suddenly, an unknown man shouted to the elder to close his mouth over the cultivators. He pays attention to the unknown. A man who is in the sky demands that the elder immediately apologizes to their guest. The elder understands that the older cultivator of the sect entered their conflict. The caretakers were no less surprised by the presence of a man. He with a smirk observes that among the sect there is still a more tactful person. The elder, realizing what position he immediately tries to justify his actions. The elder demands that the elder close his mouth and immediately apologize to him. Excuses were not important to a man. The elder, lowering his head, gritted his teeth from a strong malice to everything that was happening. Frozen his pride, a man through power still apologizes to him. Without ceasing to show his dominance, he declares that their battle did not lead to anything, because his opponent was actually very weak. He pointed to a finger on an unknown man, decides to call him to himself. He tells the man that he wants to fight the duel with that, and then he will not require all the caretakers to kneel. The man descends from the sky and stands in front of him. The elder claims that this is not necessary, and when the guy passes all the trials, they will have enough time for training battles. He thought in his thoughts that he would never join the garbage valley of heavenly incense, and came to tests only in order to act really hard. The eldest suggests going immediately to the third test, explaining that it is in the second test that everything depends on good luck. A group of cultivators who came with, he could not expect that the second test can be avoided, as the level of passage is too low due to good luck. The eldest continues to look into the eyes of a guy waiting. He also looks at the elder, pretending to analyze this proposal. He asks not to worry about it, explaining that for him there will not be every test, and even the second. He acquires his cultivator's partner, offering this together to sign up for a second test. The cultivator does not stop smiling from a strong awkwardness, but in his thoughts, the guy understood. He did not know at all, because they were familiar with only half a day. The elder again tries to indicate that he broke the firewall and should be punished for this. The elder again demands that all the caretakers cover their mouths. The eldest angrily hints from the elders that their water empress is an audience in the cultivator tower, and that should go there. Unable to argue with the elder, the man agrees to leave the tests. In his thoughts, the eldest understood that he was too strong, because he was at the 5th level of the original stage, and he not to defeat the guy alone. All cultivators begin to gather in the registration zone in anticipation of the next test. Near the gate of the second test, a rather impressive number of people crowded. The caretaker who is at the gate asks the participants in silence in order to tell all the rules of participation in the second test. The girl notifies everyone that for 12 hours, the participants will have to find a star bowl. He also carefully listens to all the rules. The girl demonstrates how exactly this flower looks like, indicating its healing indicators, and an extremely difficult opportunity to find. The cultivator offers it to be combined with their group and find 2 more participants to pass this test. At this moment, he analyzes this test and all development options. He imperceptibly decides to ask the system whether the purchase in the system is available in the system. The system conducts a short search for this plant, notifying that 10 such flowers will cost only 1 stiffener. He begins to understand that this test will be too easy for him. He puts his hand on the shoulder of the cultivator who came with him and asks to step aside. The cultivator does not quite understand what he planned. The guy offers the cultivator to make him a company and start the search for herbs only together. He thanks the cultivator for this proposal, but notes that for the entire group of 6 people, we'll have to find only 1 flower, which increases the chance of being in a large detachment. With a smile, he refuses to act in a large group, indicating that the location of the flower is only fate. He says goodbye to the cultivators, wanting to act in this case alone. The group who came with the cultivator is interested in his friend, which he left so quickly. The guy explains that he is doing to act alone. The guy, counting he is not entirely adequate, offers his friend to continue the search for new people in his team. He slowly approaches one of the first to the beginning of the tests and receives his group number. The caretaker is interested in whether he really wants to act alone. He nods approvingly without observing this. The rest of the cultivators standing behind continue to look at himself with bewilderment. He reminds himself that he arrived in this test only for the extraction of strict actions. For all emotions received from other cultivators, he again receives stiffness glasses. He passes with his sign by the beginning of the tests. He passes the signs to the caretaker and expects when he is allowed to enter the test. After a short time, the man asks him to go through and start the second stage. He slowly goes to the second test. In the end, the caretaker asks him to try and within 12 hours to return to the entrance with a star bowl. He slowly continues to walk along the path. For the guy, this test did not represent any difficulty. because he could call the plant he needed at any moment. At that moment, a strange rustle sounded in one of the bushes. The girl, along with her partner, carefully examined the clearing nearby. The girl notices a star bowl right in front of them. Partners decide not to make noise in order to pick up a flower and not be attacked. The guy offers his partner to quickly pick up the flower, because she was quite clever and fast. The girl instantly agreed to clicks to the flower what he saw. The girl on the run leans to raise the same flower. The girl was the same sectarians from the heavenly sect, which, after destruction, was completely disbanded. All students of the heavenly sect were forced to look for a new refuge. The girl could not get enough of her find, looking at the beautiful glow of the plant. At this moment, two unknown people sharply decide to attack a defenseless girl. The girl's partner manages to warn the one of the impending danger. The girl in the last second dodges the direct blow of the unknown. The man sticks his spear with all his strength to the place where the flower needed by everyone was. A small cloud of dust rises into the air. The girl's partner is immediately interested in Lee. The girl continues not to look away from the unknown cultivators. The girl had a deep abrasion on her hand, but she chose to keep silent from a partner. One of the attackers with a mockery declares that his brother's method was effective and they managed to take the plant of the second stage. The bandits do not see the opponent in the cultivators of the opponent with their helplessness. The cultivator observing injustice claims that they were the first to find the plant. Both bandits laughed out loudly, interested in whether the guy was sure of his words. The man explains to stupid cultivators that only a few students will be able to get into the Valley of Heavenly Incense once every 100 years. A man takes out his spear and adds that at this stage he gets rid of such cultivators. The bandits begin to mock again. The girl is unable to tolerate humiliation, decides to apply her abilities to insane cultivators. There were several loud cotton in the area where the battle was supposed to pass. The bandits, without hesitation, decide to attach to cultivators and kill them on the spot. At that moment he felt a strange impetus. All the time of the second test he lay on a huge stone. He carelessly analyzed all participants. It was not difficult for him to apply the system and call on one flower to himself. He understood that the mountain had a closed shape, and it was impossible for all participants to find a flower for passing the second test. Nevertheless, he decides to use the system and call on 1,000 star muscantis in just 100 points. In the moment, hundreds of flowers sprinkled on him, covering his entire stone. He sits surrounded by stellar bowls, noting that the remaining participants were puzzled by the search for flowers, that the guy was on hand. He hears the strange sounds of the battle near himself in the moment. He wanted to follow the current battle, because this was the first fight for the entire test. One of the bandits delivers another blow to the cultivator. The cultivator hardly manages to block the bandit's blow, but he easily knocks out the sword from the hands of a man. A bandit is a cultivator's valley on earth and becomes from above. The man mocks the helplessness of the cultivator. Unable to look at a miserable cultivator, a bandit decides to end his sufferings. A sharp and whipped blow of one of the bandits throws back, which he did not expect at all. This bandit did not hurt much, and he managed to restrain his attack with his armor. The second bandit does not immediately understand what happened at the moment. He adds with a smile that they could easily solve conflicts peacefully. The bandits could not dare to humiliate them to some guy wanting to join him. He is interested in the girl, whether she knows why the flower is called precisely a star bowl. The girl replies in confusion that he has no idea. The girl was not clear why the cultivator saved her. He decides to demonstrate to the girl with a grin the properties of the flower. He gets a few flower and, taking advantage of his abilities, lifts them up. The bandits were amazed that some miserable guy had as many as 3 star bowlings. With the help of magic, he raises all the above and higher these plants simultaneously using fire on them. He ends everything with a bright and exciting salute, which miserable bandits did not expect at all. The bandit overwhelmed the anger from the fact that he burned all the star bowl. The man wanted to get all the flowers. He decides to apply his two-handed sword in order to deal with bandits once and for all. He was no longer interested in these characters, as if he received the right points of cruelty. With a light movement of his hand, he scatters all cultivators. The bandits soullessly fall to the ground without signs of life. A pair of cultivators who fell into a trouble was amazed at the power of an unknown man. He throws his eyes on a couple of, deciding to help them nevertheless. He throws one of the flowers to the girl, adding that he had plenty of herbs to pass the second stage. He asks the girl to hide the flower so that other participants do not want to join them. The girl finally politely thanks the unknown savior. He remembered that this girl previously helped him with the salvation of the village of Panshun, and now he did not directly help. Another group supports the leader and decides to continue the search after a short rest. One of the men recalls about a strange guy who was the only one decided to go through a test alone. The man, deciding to cheer up his partners, believes that he alone has no chance of getting the right plant. The second cultivator, supporting the conversation, states that if he meets him, he will definitely try to take away the time from him. In the moment, the cultivator begins to feel someone's presence behind his back. Frightened by the cultivator jumps from the log and falls to the ground, crawling out of the side of the fire from fear. All cultivators revealed swords and prepared for the attack of the unknown. The shadow decides to clarify from the group whether they are looking for him. He himself turned out to be unknown. The guy repeatedly clarifies with the cultivator what he planned to do with him. The cultivator does not immediately manage to come to his senses, remaining shocked such sudden presence. The cultivator, having come to himself, requires him to intimidate it, indicating that the guy himself still did not find the right plant. Cultivators do not understand what he is trying to tell them this question. One of the cultivators suggested that he had gone crazy and began to crazy. The second cultivator supports his friend, adding that he could well go crazy because of the eternal search. He, continuing to mock the group, takes out several bowls and defiantly shows them. He takes out even more plants, showing his absolute dominance over the group. A group of cultivators could not believe that the guy alone managed to find so many flowers. With the help of his ability, he raises the miscanthus air, wanting to show really magic. He triggers a small light for a greater effect after the flowers. All flowers are blown up, showing a huge scale of salute. He calls this magic a miracle. Cultivators to the edge were suppressed that he simply destroyed the only useful thing in this test. He actively continued to light miscanthus one after another, making Bengal lights out of them. He amused the reaction of defenseless cultivators, who were unable to prevent him from destroying the plants. The whole sky was covered with salute, which he launched one after another, illuminating the entire nearest terrain. The cultivator continued to suffer from the destruction of their only chance to pass this test. One of the caretakers in a hurry goes somewhere. The elder suddenly stops. An opening man asks him to immediately let him in for the report. Entering the premises states that one of the participants in the second test simply burns all the bowls at a time. The elder could not believe what he heard because before this did not happen on their tests. The watchman adds to his report that he burned all plants only for pleasure, and in this method about 100 plants were destroyed. The elder could not believe what he heard. The man demanded that the rangers grab the offender and immediately lead to him. One of the cultivators, also not found miscanthus, is indignant that the unknown actively burns all the plants. The man believes that the unknown person is at the top of the mountain, wanting to defeat him and take the flower he needs. The man believes that it will not be difficult for them to overcome the frivolous he and pick up all his star bowls. At this moment, one of the caretakers comes to the test with a statement to immediately catch the offender. He continues to laugh carelessly from all over the circus that he managed to arrange. The system announces the presence of another 1,500 points at his disposal. He understands that continuing to mock weak cultivators is too profitable for him. Several cultivators come out of the forest, seeing the lonely. All cultivators were outraged that the guy simply spends all the stellar bowls. Another group of cultivators approaching the mountain, where he was accusing him of the same manipulations with miscanthus. One after another, various groups continued to come out of the forest. Gradually, he was surrounded by hundreds of different cultivators eager to get the same bowls. With a smile, he noticed such an accumulation of people. He was in his hand all this gathering of which ordinary cultivators did not understand. He begins to mock and mock the cultivators, causing them only aggression and the desire to kill the presumptuous guy. All cultivators shouted threats. He wanted to decapitate the guy and pick up the remaining bowls. Soja, sending a finger to the cultivators, asks those to be patient until he recount everyone. He directed his finger up, notes that he had just 300 bowls. He lifts into the air the sphere filled with a large number of bowls. All participants were at a loss where such a simple guy could get all these bowls. Each of the groups considered all the bowls and spheres. Many of the cultivators have already thought about how to attack the guy in order to take everything to themselves. Others continued to guess how the guy alone managed to collect so many rare colors. One of the cultivators invites the guy to give all his bowls, promising that none of those present will touch. He ignored the cultural proposal, decides to ask his question. He was interested in whether they saw 300 bowls in one moment. Some cultivators immediately began to ask the guy to spare them and not burn the bowls. Others tried to threaten death after rash actions. Thirds were completely crushed by pity, asking to give flowers in return for good relations. Some cultivators were so desperate that they could not restrain emotions. He states that he also did not see such a spectacle and still decides to demonstrate. He clicks his fingers with a light movement of his hand. A light was lit in the guy's hands. All cultivators began to understand what everything was going to. Each of the cultivator was amazed at the actions and missed capabilities after this action. Suddenly, a strong outbreak occurs on the mountain, because of which many cultivators were forced to cover their face. He continued to direct fire towards the sphere. Cultivators did not know how to resist the guy for his defiant actions. He also announces another spell of light of stargrass. He again sets fire to the remains of flowers, because of which a more beautiful glow appears. He points with an index finger at the clouds where stellar bowls were located. He could not get enough of his genius to burn all the bowls at a time. Many cultivators continued to look silently at the missed opportunities. Only Ash gradually settled next to the place of fireworks. He greatly amused the whole performance and reactions of the public. One of the cultivators with a shaking hand claims that he spent too much time to get on tests. Taking into a height, a man tries through emotions to attack him. The man could not forgive him for his actions, and then decides to kill him. Many cultivators, one after another, are trying to kill him for missed flowers. Having noticed an attack from all fronts does not immediately leave his secluded stone. Cultivators were decisive for a common purpose to kill him for his actions. A loud explosion sounded, and then a giant mushroom from the explosion rose into the sky. Many cultivators exposed their blades and rushed into battle without hesitation. Cultivators from previously conflicting tribes united for a common goal, namely, it is destroyed. The cultivators that he previously revered for his strength also decide to attack a soulless guy from hopelessness. There is another strong explosion in the area where he had previously stood. Stopping during the battle, the cultivators wondered if they managed to kill him. He with a grin calls his opponents weaklings, because they could not even hurt the guy. For each indignant cultivator, he accrues the glasses of cruelty. Cultivators desperately decide to attack, while he gives them the opportunity. Without any straining, he uses a barrier that blocks absolutely all attacks of low-level cultivators. One of the cultivators uses a strange spell on himself, and takes out a sword from the throat. The guy directs the sword to the area where he was the barrier, and shoots with a sword in that. The sword with a direct blow falls on the barrier, but does not leave scratches. The cultivators were desperate for their options, as they had to kill him. At this moment, under the barrier, he sorted out the inventory in search of the right item. He reviewed the blades and decides to purchase one of them. He had a plan on this occasion that required urgent use. The system makes a purchase and calls the blade in the hand. The wedge was a strange shape with gilding not characteristic of an ordinary knife. He decides to turn to the cultivators with a reminder who he really was. He was like a hellish hound rushed towards weak cultivators. He lands in the area where the most cultivators were scattering all Vokaruga. He quickly amazed every cultivator of the rising in his way. Not a single cultivator could even hurt the invincible master. He also easily cut both shields and body armor. Nothing could save him from the card. He gradually began to feel that his dagger was a continuation of his hand, and the tip was spent right in battle. He laughed loudly from such a weak and helpless battle. Many cultivators were amazed at terrible power to believe in what they saw. He continuing to need affects the next few cultivators. He continues to receive stiffness glasses from the system. He also simultaneously decides to apply small buffs on his blade. At this moment, he notices unknown figures in the sky. The caretakers ask to calm down all the cultivators due to the recent noise. One of the cultivator, without inventing anything better, begins to complain for impotence in front of him. The elder with a serious face calls him and claims that he went through the second test, offering to go along with the caretaker for the third test. He agrees with the decision of the senior cultivator. In his thoughts, the old man noticed that they were going to plant this cultivator. But everything had changed after a demonstration of his strength. The remaining cultivators were outraged that the elders simply closed their eyes at the dead cultivators. SE also reminds the elder that he still has not passed 2 more trials. He was indignant that the elders did not monitor compliance with the rules from the word at all. SE also recalls that at the first stage he was asked to jump through the third. The elder is in a stupor from the words of the guy. All cultivators were also perplexed from what they heard. He asks justice and hold the rest of the competition with dignity. He takes his head from so many swimmers at the same time because he only wanted to have fun. He removes his hand from his head, stating that he was disappointed in testing. In the moment, caretakers inform everyone that the time for the remaining participants is completed and the task is valid. He asks the remaining participants not to worry, after which rises high into the sky. He offers their last exit, namely to attack it and pick up a flower. Many cultivators could not believe that the guy was going to destroy all the remaining bowls. The other half of the cultivators suspect that the guy has been using artifacts all this time. He calmly stated that he only wanted to push his boundaries. From the unique, all the cultivators again plunged into the endless rage of which he sharply began to calculate a large number of points. Cultivators are equal to the fact that they have no other choice, how to finally deal with the guy. The caretaker decides to turn to her elder with a proposal. The caretaker offers not to intervene in this conflict and wait for the third test. All cultivators united rushed into the lonely hay. The caretaker is not able to observe the mockery of the guy begins to pray to herself. He knew that cultivators could not do anything to him, so he applies his branded spell. From his hands, the guy begins to radiate a strange glow. The glow gradually envelops the entire territory next to it, all cultivators instead of attacking sharply in defense. But as a result, everything was in vain, because with only one spell of all people he envelops next. The caretakers were shocked by the power of lonely standing. The guy was not embarrassed that he killed all cultivators. On the contrary, he stated that he became much stronger. He claims that at the second stage he does not hold anything more than him, and now he is ready to begin the third test. The elder gradually begins to enrage the arrogant behavior, and how he relates to all the test. Having opened the system, he watches that he managed to collect a small amount of experience from the whole battle. He was also glad of such an amount, because he came to tests only to have fun. He with a laugh goes towards the third test, wanting to go through it in the same way. On the way to the third test, a considerable number of cultivators gathered. Before the cultivators there was a huge shower tower, where the third test was supposed to pass. The shower tower was actually the most valuable artifact of the Valley of Heavenly Incense, which was under high-level protection. Having arrived at the third test, caretakers gradually begin to tell the rules for passing the stairs. The caretakers also asked all participants to sign their wooden signs, which played a significant role in the test. Each of the participants must keep with them a sign, which will finally be fixed at the end of the test. The caretaker announces the start of the test, explaining that only 50 people will go at a time. The caretaker demonstrates 2 signs of previous participants, and reports that everyone else was killed on the second floor of the shower tower. The caretaker congratulates 2 participants gathered before the 4th floor. All cultivators in waiting for their turn wanted the same success and themselves. One of the cultivators notices that one of the survivors of the beginning to move slowly. He thought in his thoughts that his soul was not so well tempered in such tests. The plate slowly continued to rise higher and higher. A man with each step stood at her more and more with difficulty. The man wanted to rise even higher and reach the 4th floor. The legs of the cultivator gradually began to shake with strong pressure. The cultivator's plate sharply fixed at the place of his last step and appeared on the outer wall of the Tower of the Soul. Several cultivators ran up and tried to help the fallen cultivator. He notes that the cultivator nevertheless managed to reach the 4th floor, assuming that he used the treatment technique. He understood that he should also achieve the maximum floor without any effort. The caretaker claims the recruitment of the following participants who entered the shower tower. The caretaker standing at the entrance to the shower tower recalls that the number of those included should not exceed 50 people. In response, the cultivators decided to mourn. It was not clear to the caretaker why there were still no people who wanted to enter the following. One of the cultivators, finding herself, is trying to explain that he wants to enter the next participants. It was not clear to the caretaker why everyone was afraid. The cultivator only laughed awkwardly. Another small group went to the caretaker and explained the strange participant named He, who killed more than 100 people in the second test. The caretaker is angry from the weak cultivators calling those underpants. The cultivators began to discuss something from their conversations. It was clear that none of them knew how exactly he looked. He approached closer, asks for permission to go to Basha's shower, holding out his number. One frightened cultivator looks at him. The rest of the crowd also pays attention to the already known in narrow circles of the killer. He calmly continues to look towards the shower tower. After completing the set of cultivators to watch or announces the beginning of the third test for the second group, the signs begin to disappear from the hands of all cultivators. The signs slowly climbed into the sky. I am going to a huge line, after which I fly up to the shower tower. One by one, cultivators entered through the entrance of the shower tower. From the hands of the guy also disappears a sign, I join the general colony. Sue's sign was one of the last, but this was not a bit embarrassed by the guy. Seeing how the others enter the temple, also decide to go after them. The guy slightly strains the unknown. I assume that he will calmly cope with this test. He slowly passes through the portal, entering another world. At first glance, it seemed to the guy that the tests did not imagine, and he does not make any special efforts in spiritual energy. Suddenly, do not understand where the huge force of pressure fell on the guy, because of which he falls to his knees. The guy in horror holds his hands on the floor so that he does not completely fall on his stomach. The guy was not clear why such a force crushed against him, because this is just the first floor. All participants, having noticed a suffering guy, decides to mock Shu. Because he killed about 100 people only one test back. The man decides not to linger on a weak Shui for a long time, continuing to move to the top. Su did not understand why all the cultivators felt normally while he suffered. The system explains to its owner that his soul has not yet adapted to the new world, and it will take a little time. The system notified as a percentage when the guy approaches a normal feeling. Zhu continued to expect when his body adapts to the new world at that moment. Several more cultivators who decided to help Zhu came in, but after they found out who it went with a laugh. The guy enraged how other participants, he planned to take revenge on them on the way to the top. The system announces a successful adaptation to the new world, after which the guy cleared his throat slightly. Zhu slowly stands on both legs, wanting to catch up with his offenders. The system at this moment offers for a more successful adaptation to take a heavenly pill and strengthen the power of the soul, without hesitation of C, buys the right amount of pills. Successfully making a purchase in the system in the guy's hand, a small pill appears. Zhu immediately throws this transmission to strengthen the strength of the spirit. In the moment, Zhu begins to feel a surge of power responding to his greatness. The guys were slightly embarrassed that all the participants left him so quickly and continued to move up. Zhu stepped on the first step and decides to catch up with his offenders as quickly as possible and punish them for such a rude attitude towards him. Many cultivators have already managed to get to the second floor, and some of them felt weak in the body. One of the cultivators to notice that the pressure on the second floor is much more powerful than on the first, and we are already getting more difficult to get higher. Another cultivator from anger demanded that his opponent close his mouth because he was trying to focus on the test. Suddenly do not understand where all the participants appear from behind, and the Shu himself requires that they stop. Rolling the sleeves of Shu planned to punish with those rough power and throw them to the first floor. All cultivators who saw the guy were amazed that he was able to scream and even climb to the second floor after all efforts. One of the participants states that in this test it makes no sense to be angry because it was forbidden to fight the rules. It was not clear what purpose of this test was forbidden to fight. The man calls the guy a village manor, pointing to his stupidity, adding that this test was created to verify the strength of the soul and willpower. The guy was not clear where in the tower there were so many rules, asking the question of how to get around them and punish his offenders. Suddenly, one unusual idea appears in the guy's head. Zhu asks to skip it further as soon as possible to implement his plan. Climbing higher and higher than Su is interested in whether people are available over him. Upon learning that there is only a couple of Zhu people with a grin over him, he decides to climb a little higher over the main mass of the cultivator. Zhu calls for a small armful of firewood to implement his plan. The guy also calls on a small number of spices. It is not clear to the participants where the guy could take all this. You assume that he was, and before that carried everything he needed with him. Zhu also takes out the chicken, demonstratively showing it to other participants in the test. The cultivators in the moment stopped, not understanding what they were trying to show them, this Shue. One of the cultivators loses control over itself, from which it falls on the first floor with a roar. Once outside the tests and flew out on the second floor, the guy shouted that he wanted to file a complaint. The man runs up to the caretaker and claims that one of the participants confuses the other cultivators. All cultivators waiting for the next set are mocking the mediocre man and his weakness. One of the cultivators understood that it was Shue who had committed the act. The man began to tell with anger what happened in this tower and why he flew out. At this moment, on one of the floors of Shue, he began to prepare fried chicken with might and main attract other cultivators. Many cultivators could not cope with their feelings, because this food was really tasty. Cultivators tried to restrain their emotions and their desires, but the cultivators were powerless from such an exquisite taste of chicken. One after another cultivators, they slowly flew out of the third test, having lost the only opportunity to enter the sect. One of the cultivators requires the opportunity to file a complaint against one of the participants and pass the test again. The man was angry into such injustice and inconsistency in the rules. The caretaker claims that the guy was too weak and therefore lost control of his body. The man could not control his emotions and wanted to return to this test. The man explains that it was because of the chicken wings that he felt in the third test they all flew out. The caretaker did not believe that it was because of the chicken wings that all participants flew out of the third test together. The rest of the participants who still decided to let the guy go forward rejoiced that they did not encounter him. The cultivators standing nearby began to discuss the guy and his origin. One of the elders approaches the caretaker and turns to him. The man offers the caretaker to open the window of the second floor and see what exactly was happening in the perfume tower. The man showing the tower also asks the caretaker to ventilate the second floor so that all the others can find out whether the words of the cultivators are really true. The caretaker agrees with the words of the elder and applies his equipment to the second floor. The caretaker using the spell checks what happens on the second floor. Zhu in the moment also feels strange presence next to him. Sue notices a strange window and decides to look into it. The whole aroma that was on the second floor slowly leaving the window developed in the wind. The aroma slowly reached the very elder that he felt that. The man could not believe that he felt because it was a divine, delicious smell. Cultivators could not believe that chicken wings could smell like that. The elder gradually became clear why all the cultivators instantly flew out of the second floor. At this moment, he decides to wave the cultivator himself under the Tower of Spirits. In anticipation of the rest of the cultivators, everything continued to sit on the floor and eat chicken wings. One by one, cultivators gradually began to feel unknown, a delicious smell. Sue showed the chicken wings, showing my superiority. The guy ate as tastier as possible in order to attract the attention of all cultivators. The cultivators silently watched the guy eat chicken wings, unable to cope with this. Having bitten a small piece, the smell of chicken was dispelled throughout the second floor. Shui slowly swallows another delicious piece of chicken. Men continue to carefully look at the guy cope with their emotions. The elder decides to visit Shui, welcomes him and interests him what he is doing in the tower. The guy explains that he was hungry and decided to eat right in the tower. I am interested in whether this is forbidden by the rules. The man explains that this is not prohibited by the rules, assuming that it was his plan to eliminate the rest of the participants. The guy continues to pretend that he does not understand what the elder is talking about, is explained by the fact that he was just hungry. The man politely asks Sue to stop using food and distract other participants from passing the test. The guy clarifies whether he can continue to eat anything else without such an appetizing smell. To this question, the guy receives an approving answer from the elder. The guy easily throws his chicken to the floor, continuing to move up. In the end, a man thanks Sue for understanding, saying goodbye to him. The guy slowly continues to move as high as possible for the actions of his spiritual energy. The cultivators were amazed that the guy so easily abandoned his ingenious strategy and continued to move up. At this moment, the cultivator, who was on the second floor, tried to apply something to himself. The man continued to try to cope with his soul, trying to avoid such a delicious smell. The cultivator also noticed that more than 10 people were already knocked out by the SEE strategy. The man demanded that the rest of the participants closed his mouth and silently moved, because all this happened precisely due to their fault. Cultivators continued to blame each other for making fun of the guy at the beginning of the test. Having finished the discussion, the cultivators continued to move to the third floor, trying to catch up with Sue. With each floor, the cultivator became more difficult to rise higher and higher. The cultivators were only pleased with the fact that they managed to get to the third floor. The man was amazed that only a few people managed to get to the third floor, even though all the participants were talented. The man decides to try to cope with his spiritual energy and overcome this pressure on the third floor. A man used spells. I form a small bluish sphere between his hands. Other participants who mastered such arts are also trying to control their souls. At that moment, Shui was all ready. On the third floor, and without any effort, I watched the rest of the participants. The man reminded that the guy promised the elders do not bother the rest of the cultivator with his tasty smells. Another cultivator called Shui shameless for his dirty deeds. Xu laughed from such statements of the cultivator and stated that in no case would he dare to distract the cultivators with delicious smells. The man claims that if the guy dares to distract him again, then he will certainly kill him. At this moment, a rather terrible smell appears in the room. The cultivator has to close the nose from such an unpleasant odor. The whole room was gradually filled with a terrible smell that knocked down the rest of the cultivators. The man of all his strength tried to find out from Shui that he prepared with them. He decides to scoop up a slightly strange liquid accumulated in the kazan. He pours this liquid into his plate, wanting to taste his dish. The whole staircase was filled with a terribly smelly smell. Cultivators were unable to endure it. He raises a dish over his head, saying that this work of art is his branded dish. Cultivators began to erupt all the contents of their stomachs right on the spot, unable to restrain themselves. One by one, the sectarians left him due to powerlessness in front of such a smelly strept. The sectarians became less and less each time. He pretends to be puzzled by the reaction of cultivators by offering to taste his dish. One of the cultivators, not wanting to knock out his nose with both hands so mediocre. The man could not believe that he was so inhuman, offering such a disgusting dish. From only one thought, a man turned into the wrong side. The cultivator's face turned very pale. The cultivator plan got out of control, because of which he lost consciousness. The whole situation, he made a great laugh, because everyone who climbed to him immediately retired. He proposed to taste his dish one by one. All cultivators were very pale. Another cultivator, which appeared at the entrance to the tower, asks to give him the opportunity to file a complaint. The caretaker is interested in that this time the cultivators did not suit. The cultivators again began to blame for a dishonest game. The caretaker requires everyone else to open the windows of the third floor immediately. Without unnecessary words, the rest of the caretakers open the window on the third floor. He, leaning over the last participant, continues to offer to taste his cooking. The caretakers decide to observe what exactly he did this time. Taking tofu out of his plate, he handed him to the unfortunate cultivators. The sectarians who observed what was happening could not believe in ruthless behavior. The man, pale, continues to turn off, trying to restrain his reflexes. He, unable to restrain himself with a laugh, pokes Tofu on the cheek to the cultivator, which was the last point in all this. The cultivator broke out of all the cracks, because of which it automatically becomes retired. He excited only one question from all this, namely why no one wanted to taste his dishes. The caretaker was furious, as if he continued to eliminate other participants with his smell. He reminds the caretaker that he forbade it to cook food with a delicious smell, and not vice versa. The window was still openly in poverty, not only in the room of the shower tower. The entire smell from behind the open window gradually began to go out into the street, because of which the cultivators were not able to breathe. He calls the caretaker shameless for his ruthless actions in relation to other cultivators. He calls cultivators amateurs, pointing to the delicate taste of tofu with its serious aroma. He decides to demonstrate that in fact the tofu was edible. With a smile, he calls his dish the most delicious. I raise the sticks up.